It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
90.7 FM in New York and on YouTube. One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on this Saturday night. NBA free agency in full swing. The Knicks and Nets locking up key pieces of their future. The Yankees continue their hot stretch with a walk-off single from Brett Gardner last night. The Mets on the other side struggling a little bit. The NFL, Olympics, Pat O'Keefe joins us in hour number 2. Nick DeLuca alongside Sam Davis. Colin Loughran will join us with the headlines in a moment. Alex Wolz, our producer. Sam, a lot going on. Good to be here with you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm glad we're starting with NBA free agency because I need a little bit more time to cool off with what's going on with the Mets here. I need a little time to really regain my focus and really think about the future of this Mets team. But anyway, I'm very excited to be here with you, Nick, and excited to talk sports.
For sure. And since you mentioned it, I'm going to have to go right there. You need to cool off with the Mets a little bit. They've certainly done that for you. They have done the cooling off for you. That is 7 losses in their last 10 games. Another difficult one last night. Edwin Diaz coming in and not quite able to keep the game within reach, but a really frustrating time for them. And then the Yankees on the other side really picking it up of late. And that, at least for me, as someone who takes an interest in the Yankees, is an encouraging sign.
Yeah, with the Mets, I mean, it all starts with the offense. You know, you can point specific fingers, especially last night, at what happened with Edwin Diaz. And I certainly was a little frustrated and confused with that decision, like I think most Mets fans, to go with him in the 8th. But overall, it's just been a problem that this Mets team has had all year, and it's been offense. And they've kind of been able to hide it with how well the pitching staff has performed, especially with Jacob deGrom at the top. But now he's hurt. The depth has been a little thin at times. And the offense, the lineup is fully healthy, and they still really haven't figured out a way to get going and start hitting. And with the Yankees, I mean, we're seeing the opposite. We see with the addition of Rizzo and Gallo, I think it's just completely changed the foundation of this team, not just on the field, but also off the field, and kind of their confidence. You can tell. I mean, wins like the one they had on Friday night and just how they've been playing lately, it just looks like a completely different team. And all of a sudden, the playoffs are well within reach, it seems like, for this Yankees team that earlier in the year, we were definitely wondering and doubting if they had that in them.
Yeah, it's such a weird stretch for both of these teams because I feel like it has changed a little bit of our perceptions about who they are. And the Mets seemingly running away with the division, and you felt like, yes, you know that the hitting needs to improve a little bit, but they've got this stellar pitching staff. The bullpen that had a bunch of question marks, it really performed pretty well to that point, save for a few miscues here and there. So you felt confident about the Mets being able to, after the acquisition of Javi Baez, continue that stretch. Perhaps he adds a little bit of pop to the lineup, and they're going to be off and running. And then the Yankees, who just gut-wrenching loss after gut-wrenching loss, could not get out of their own way. And so interesting to see how poorly they've hit this year, because this is a team that coming into the year was still built on, we're going to outslug everybody, and we're going to hope that with the new additions that we've got on our pitching staff to pitch well enough. And it's been a total reversal, of course, for them. And then to see the way things have flipped over the last 10 games or so, you bring in Anthony Rizzo and you bring in Joey Gallo, and this team feels like one that I don't know that we ever necessarily shut down their ability to make the playoffs, but certainly no way this team is going to win the World Series. And yet those two moves are moves that a team makes if they're really chasing after a World Series the way the Yankees apparently are now. And they seem to have worked. So a team that now you feel like can definitely be a player as you go into October, and the Mets who have fallen off, and just both teams seemingly hiding some things, but the Yankees have hidden them better so far.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I mean, we talked about how with the Yankees, I mean, the pitching staff is certainly overachieved and overperformed all year. But at this point, who's to think that that's not going to continue? And if that does, I mean, sure that the lineup for the Yankees has definitely struggled, and you're seeing guys like DJ LeMahieu not have the seasons that they've had in the past, and certainly not been the guys they used to be. But if you're scoring just enough runs and the pitching staff is dominating, that's kind of what the Mets were earlier in the year. It works. You're going to win a lot of baseball games. So I think with the Mets, you're really starting to see at this point the flaws of this team, and they have to figure it out quick, or else. I know it's not a great division, but I mean, the Phillies aren't a bad team, and you're kind of seeing that this weekend. I think they can certainly win this division. So the Mets have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, two teams that have a lot of work to do. The Yankees still have work to do. It's been better of late, but still on the outside looking into the playoff picture, and perhaps the division still in reach for them. We'll see how things progress as they continue. A better schedule for them, too, out of the trade deadline as well is something that I think is lost a little bit. Not that Seattle has not played well this year, but I don't think that's the caliber of team the Yankees are chasing in terms of going forward into October. NBA free agency in full swing as well. The Knicks making a couple of moves, locking up Julius Randle on a bit of a hometown discount. He wanted to stay in New York, only 4 years, $117 million, but he does take the discount with the way that the NBA contract landscape is structured. Kevin Durant staying in Brooklyn for another 4 years on a not so much of a discount, $198 million on that contract, but two key pieces of the future locked up for the future of New York basketball.
Yeah, I mean, with Julius Randle, a lot, people point fingers at what happened in the playoffs, and understandably, because it was obviously, as much as the Knicks and the Knicks fan base thought we were not going to be there, they weren't going to be in that position to be in a playoff game last season. They obviously still wanted the team to perform well, and going out in that first round exit was definitely disappointing. And you can look at Julius Randle as a guy that definitely underperformed in that playoff series. But, I mean, you can't forget everything he did for this team for the entire regular season last season, and also what you expect to carry in. You expect maybe, first time in the playoffs, a little bit of jitters, maybe not trying to be more than yourself, I guess, could be something that Julius Randle struggled with last year. But I don't expect that to continue, and obviously the Knicks front office doesn't either. They trust Julius Randle and what he's going to continue to deliver to this team, which I think is a great decision. And with Kevin Durant, I mean, that's great news for Nets fans. I think that wasn't something that was guaranteed. They weren't sure. I mean, you had Nets front office come out and say, we want to re-sign all three of them, no matter how realistic that is, or even if that's even possible. But the fact that they were able to get KD, I think really is the leader of the pack there. And the fact that they were able to lock him up is a huge deal for Nets fans, that now we see their window, I think, kind of start to increase instead of what we thought with only having all three under their control for just a year or two. Now that window's increasing if you're going to have KD around longer.
We got into this a little bit before the show, but which conference is better? Is it the East or the West now? The East is certainly closing the gap. Now, I don't know that I'm prepared to say that it's taken over the West. I know others who are producing our show today might have other words. Alex Wolves, he made that claim, but we'll see, and time will tell as things go forward. But it is interesting to see the way that the landscape is shifting in the NBA with some of the improvements that a number of the teams in the East have made, and we'll get to that later in hour number one on the show. But I think that Julius Randle coming back to the Knicks is such a huge deal for them, not only because he did not hold their feet to the fire in making himself a max player, but to lock up a guy who just improved so much last year. Will he be able to improve by that margin again? Probably not. But to lock up a guy who wants to be here, who's about New York, with the way things have gone for the Knicks over the last 20 years, I think is so huge. You'll bring in other guys who want to be there. Evan Fournier, Kemba Walker, who talked about potentially being interested in the Knicks even last offseason. So that, I think, is a huge deal to lock up that part of it, to try and build a team and build a team around Julius Randle of guys that want to be there. So we'll have to leave it right there. We'll head to break just for a moment. Here on the other side, we're talking more Knicks and Nets. Deeper dive into Julius Randle's contract, Evan Fournier into the fold, Kemba Walker, KD's extension. That's next right here on One on One.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Back here on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Nick DeLucas, Sam Davis getting into some more basketball. Knicks with the moves that they've made. Kemba Walker, Evan Fournier into the fold, Julius Randle here for the foreseeable future in Gotham City. 4 years, $117 million. The KD extension as well in Brooklyn, 4 years, $198 million. And we'll break that down for you. I want to start with the Knicks, just in continuing this conversation before we had to go to break. But I don't know where this offseason lands them in terms of being a contender, and we'll get to that in a moment. But it's hard not to feel like the Knicks have made just a significant improvement over the last couple of weeks with some of the names that they've brought in. And I don't think it's putting them in the upper echelon of the East. They're still a step below Milwaukee and Philadelphia and certainly Brooklyn. But a team that you feel like can better compete and maybe take a next step forward into winning a playoff series or two.
Yeah, that's got to be the next goal. And I think there's not a real player out there that's going to change this Knicks team from where they are to top of the East right away. That's not something they could do in one off season, really. It's something they're building on and working on. And the next step, I think, has got to be that playoff series victory. But in terms of who they got, I mean, I really like all the moves they made, to be honest. I mean, we talked about Julius Randle a little bit. He's going to just having him back is huge. And there's something to be said about showing up in the next season after having such a successful year last year. And I think Pat O'Keefe, our interview later, he talked about this as well, is there's a lot of confidence that goes into the team when they come back and see all the same guys around them, a team that had success in the regular season, that won a lot of games and really went on a great run for this team. To have Julius Randle back, to have Derrick Rose back, Nerlens Noel, I mean, and then you got nice additions, of course, in Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier. Having those guys just gives the team a ton of confidence, I think, coming from an offseason going into next year. And I think that's really going to help this Knicks team as well, because the next step, I think, really is winning a playoff series. And with Kemba Walker, that's somebody, I thought that was a really great move, first of all, because of how badly he wanted to be in New York. You know, yeah. He's from the Bronx, and that's a huge part of this as well. You want to get guys that really want to be on your team and performing. And, of course, he did everything he did at Madison Square Garden for UConn. just going back to that place and that environment, I think that's just an incredible move. You can say what you want about the knee injury, and sure, that's a little bit of a risk, but he doesn't have to play, the max amount of minutes per game. He can kind of split time. You have guys like Derrick Rose, Manuel quickly in there as well. You've got plenty of guards that can take some of the time away from Kemba Walker. That way he's eased back in to protect that knee. So, but overall, I think that's something you really have to highlight with Kemba Walker and with Julius Randle and a bunch of these players, is they really want to be in New York and play for the Knicks. And that is huge. And that environment, I think, is really going to help them find success next season.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the Kemba Walker move more so than anything else, because if they are getting what is true to form Kemba Walker health-wise, that's a guy who's averaged north of 20 points a game for, 4 out of the last 5 years, all 5 of the last 5 years. He is a guy who is an all-star for sure. I mean, is he an all-NBA player? No, he is not on that next level star type of talent. But at the same time, he's a dude you can win with. And pairing him with Julius Randle, that's a formidable 1-2 punch if you're getting that Kemba Walker. Now, that's a big if, because the health is, of course, a concern, and it has been a concern before this knee injury, too. I mean, he's been a guy who's had some of those injury issues in the past. But that is the boom or bust move that I love that the Knicks just made, because you're not committing to him for much. It's $8 million for 1 year. Absolutely a move worth making, especially for a team that's had trouble potentially attracting some of those free agents. But to get a guy who wants to be in New York, bring him into that culture, he is someone who I think fits pretty well with what Tom Thibodeau wants to do as the head coach of the New York Knicks, just mentality-wise. I think he's a guy who offers that scoring upside for them as well, which I think lacked just a little bit. I mean, Julius Randle really improved in his ability to get to the basket and score, but still not a guy who you sit there and think of as somebody who is a bona fide bucket getter, is the phrase that's always thrown around there. But a guy who can create his own shot, I think, is the most important thing. And that is absolutely Kemba Walker when healthy. He can make something out of nothing. Give him the ball with the shot clock winding down, and he's your guy who can go and score for you. So if Kemba Walker can be that guy, assuming the health is where it needs to be, I think this is a home run move for the New York Knicks. But, of course, the health is something that needs to be paid attention to.
Yeah, and I think, looking at the Knicks and Hawks in the playoffs last season, you kind of saw some of the Knicks' weaknesses, which is, I think, just shows how important it was that the Knicks played so well last year, because just to get to that opportunity, and I know it didn't go the way a lot of Knicks fans wanted, but to get to that opportunity and see where you can make this team better in the offseason is huge. And then I think they really applied that to this offseason with Kemba Walker. Evan Fournier is another guy who is going to help shooting the basketball. He's a quality shooter. Some people say it's a little too much money for a guy like that. But I mean, he's a shooter, and he's really going to help your team. So that's another great move, I think, to surround him with Kemba Walker and Julius Randle, like we mentioned. And then we haven't even mentioned RJ Barrett as well, a guy that, people could realistically see as a superstar down the road, somebody that has taken that next step, and I think will continue to grow as well, along with Randle going forward. But I think it's huge when you see a team that had an early playoff exit, but they're not satisfied with just making the playoffs. And that's obvious with the offseason that they had. They were looking to improve their team. Evan Fournier and Kemba Walker definitely do that and make this team a lot better. So going forward, the goal isn't just, let's just make the playoffs again. Let's win a playoff series. That becomes the new goal. And it has to be with what the front office has done this offseason to really prioritize the weaknesses they had last year and improving on those.
I love that you mentioned RJ Barrett too, because I think he is such an important part of the fold for the Knicks going forward. And it's similar to me, actually, as odd as this sounds, to what we were talking about with the Yankees a little bit earlier, where yes, they brought in these guys, but it's about the people who are there to begin with that are really going to matter going forward. And I think that is really what is going on with the Knicks right now, because yes, Kemba Walker has that star potential added to the fold. But again, the knee injury, you don't know. And I don't think you can count on him to be this boom proposition because you only signed him for 1 year, $8 million. And Fournier, I think, is a nice piece, but he's certainly not somebody you're bringing in to say, okay, go carry this team, score 40 points a night. That's not the type of player that Evan Fournier is, despite being a good shooter. So when you think about what the Knicks look like, it's about Julius Randle continuing to get better at 4 years, $117 million, and a great first step and so much improvement made for him into last season. But now, can he replicate that? Can he get that much better? Can he take the Knicks to the next level? And RJ Barrett the same way, because he is a major factor as well. It'd be a 1-2 punch with Julius Randle and Kemba Walker, but how about a 1-2-3 punch if RJ Barrett can continue to get better and be a more reliable option as a scorer and put forth some of that potential to really being a more consistent player? Because you certainly saw flashes last year. RJ Barrett played some really good basketball, but at times was not that type of player. So now, can he find that consistency? Can he be a driving force behind the Knicks' success? And I think if those guys who are there, if it is the RJ Barrett, if it is the Julius Randle getting better, that's when you're going to see the Knicks take the next jump. They're going to win a playoff series. They might win 2. They can be a factor in the East if the guys that they have are able to get better.
Yeah, and keeping those guys in the same locker room, in the same, I think that just gives them a little bit more confidence. So maybe Julius Randle with this new contract comes into next season knowing the Knicks want him here. He knows where he needs to improve, and that maybe will give him a little bit more confidence, especially come playoff time down the road when they really need him to step up and kind of be that leader of the team. Because like you said, sure, you'd love to see Kemba Walker be that solid 1-2 punch along with Randle, but that's not guaranteed at all. So the fact that it comes down to really putting your faith in guys like Randle, guys like RJ Barrett, just to really step up and be those leaders of the team, guys that have went through what they went through last year and all that success. And they know what they need to do to reach that again going forward. And then you got to give credit to Tom Thibodeau, because just an incredible coach and what he was able to do last year. And I think, like you said, Kemba Walker and Fournier kind of fit nicely with what Thibodeau is going to look to do and his coaching style. So I think having him at the head as well just makes you pretty confident in the Knicks. And it's a crowded Eastern Conference, to kind of mention it. You got the defending champion in the Bucks. You have the Nets, who, assuming they're fully healthy, are right up there as finals contenders for sure. And then you have some other teams that got better as well, like the Heat this offseason. And it goes down the list even to the Sixers. The Bulls improved a lot this offseason as well. So it's a crowded Eastern Conference for the Knicks for sure. But the goal, I think, definitely has to be winning a first-round playoff series. It's not the end-all, be-all, I guess, if you go and don't win, but I think it would definitely be very disappointing considering what happened this past year and how much better they have gotten this offseason.
Where is the ceiling for this next team?
The ceiling is, I'm going to stick with a second-round appearance or a first-round playoff victory right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's tough. I think it's higher than that.
Well, I just think the Eastern Conference is really crowded. That's where it gets tricky.
I get it's crowded, but I feel like the Knicks have made some really good moves here.
They definitely have, and we've talked about it. I mean, we have talked about how much better they've gotten, but I don't know. I don't know. I guess maybe you could see them winning a second-round series as well, but to me, that would be
them winning a second-round series. I think this team is good enough to win a second-round series.
So that's your ceiling for them?
Yes, that's my ceiling.
Okay. So it's not that much different. You're making it seem like it's a huge difference.
Well, I'm just saying, you're trying to tell me that they're going to be out in the first round again.
No. I'm saying in a second-round appearance, that's something they can do, and I think they should do. But getting past the second round for me doesn't seem like it's possible.
All right. I disagree.
You can play the tapes back. You might play the tapes back, and I could be incredibly wrong. I mean, we were all wrong about the Knicks last year. So.
I hope you are incredibly wrong. Sounds like it right now. I'm just messing with you. But still, I think that the ceiling is a little bit higher. I am really in on this Kemba Walker move, and I think that that's going to be really good for them. Can Julius Randle take the next step is obviously the question. I think he can. I think he can get a lot better just with what he showed last year. I think people forget how young Julius Randle is. I mean, he's not that young by NBA standards, but a guy who you feel like has been in the league 15 years, he's only 26, 27 years old. So he is a younger guy. I like that part of it. Can RJ Barrett get better? I think the answer is a yes and then some. So I do think the ceiling is high. I will grant you that it is a crowded Eastern Conference, and I like what the Heat have done too, and we'll get to that in a moment. And circling back to the Nets a little bit too, just with KD in the fold for another 4 years, and Kyrie and Harden there, and doing the best that they can to try and re-sign everybody. Of course, that's probably not going to be realistic, and we'll see how those things shake out going forward into the future. But I do think it is an interesting conversation with them having locked up KD. Where does this put them in the rest of the context of the Eastern Conference? Because we just talked about, you think it's into the second round for the Knicks. I think the Knicks can win a second round playoff series, but where does that leave the rest of the conference with Brooklyn, who you know is going to be at the top? Milwaukee is the defending NBA champion, and I find it really odd that there is not a lot of confidence in Milwaukee going forward after just winning the NBA championship. That is usually not something that occurs. Probably most similar to Toronto when they won it, with Kawhi departing, and of course Golden State with the injuries that they had. It was just an interesting way that the finals occurred and happened. But it's a crowded Eastern Conference for sure. And are the Nets at full strength, KD locked in for 4 years in a spot where they are definitely the top dog in the East? And where does that leave the Miami Heat, who have made a couple of really nice moves, and the Knicks, who have made moves, and an Atlanta Hawks team who I think has room to get a lot better, and the 76ers, who've got a bunch of unanswered questions with where Ben Simmons is going to end up. It seems like the Eastern Conference is certainly improving, and then trying to sift through what we're going to see is a little bit challenging.
Yeah, I think the Nets, when they're full, I mean, you have to say with the Nets, they have to be fully healthy to really. And
that is also a legitimate if too, because they have not been healthy a lot. I feel like they get a pass for that, but that doesn't exist for me.
No, I agree, because all last season we didn't see the big three play together at all, really. So what's to assume that things are going to change? I mean, to be honest, I know that's kind of a pessimistic way to look at it, but I mean, it's definitely a big if to see the Nets being fully healthy. If they are, I think they're definitely the best in the East, and I think it's going to be extremely difficult to beat them. But I think even with having KD going long term here, I mean, it's huge for this Nets team to really just get a little confidence for the front office around. Maybe we can keep 2 out of the 3 of the big 3. I think that's pretty realistic. Maybe you can lock up Harden as well in addition to KD, and that really creates a dominant team. That I think if those two could stay healthy. And that was the narrative last season too, is like, you don't even really need all 3. You just kind of need 2 at the same time to really be dominant in the Eastern Conference. It's going to be a little bit different this year with how well the Bucks played last year, and they're still going to be good. And then you have the Heat as well improved, and you go down the list there, like you mentioned. But if the Nets have KD long term, it's hard for me not to believe that they get a championship somewhere in that time frame with a player like him. And then you add Harden, you throw him and Kyrie into the mix. Those guys staying healthy isn't guaranteed, but if they are, the Nets are the team to beat. And then you have, I mean, with the Bucks, you mentioned how people are kind of down on them after winning the finals, and I agree with you. That's definitely the thought process. And
I don't understand it.
The root of that for me, I think, is just because the Nets and the Lakers were not fully healthy. So a lot of people say the Bucks, they kind of walk through the playoffs easily, but that's totally not true. I mean, they certainly earned a playoff, but they certainly earned a championship there. So calling them a team that kind of just, they got lucky because they faced the Brooklyn Nets with a kind of hurt Harden and only a healthy KD, and they didn't have to play the Lakers in the NBA Finals. But you can't really slight a team for who they play. That's out of their control, and they did everything they could to beat the Brooklyn Nets, even despite the fact that it was really just KD out there. So they're still going to be a formidable opponent in the Eastern Conference. But I think the reason that people say, oh, they're not going to be as good as they were last year is just because you expect the Lakers and the Nets to be fully healthy. But expecting the Nets to be fully healthy, I think, is a little bit too much to ask, just because the Big Three hasn't played together collectively for more than a couple games.
I just think the Bucks do what they do so well in a way that is not the same with most of the other teams in the Eastern Conference. I mean, they understand with Giannis and that core being together for a number of years and Mike Budenholzer into a couple of years as their head coach, they just understand what they want to do and are able to accomplish that. And I feel like, yes, the star power is perhaps, and Giannis Antetokounmpo is a superstar, but past that, Chris Middleton is not that number two in a way that James Harden or Kyrie Irving is to Kevin Durant. But I do think what is lost a little bit is that team basketball. And I think there is something to be said for just the way and the fluidity with which the Bucks played this year compared to just the way the pieces fit together with the Nets or with some of the other teams that are star laden. And I think that at the end of the day, the Stars are still going to win.
Yeah, I think talent wins out.
Milwaukee did show you a little bit about there is something to be said for playing team basketball the way that they did. And of course, you know, Giannis scoring a bunch of points in the finals. What did he have in the closeout game? Was it 50?
I think it was 50.
It was 50. So, you know, that helps too. But I just feel like they really know how to work around Giannis. And that I think is a little bit unfair that they are being just tossed to the side and say, they're not going to repeat or even compete come 2021 and into 2022. And I just don't think that that's fair to them. So we'll see. I like what the Nets have done. I like what the Knicks have done. But now it's about the health and for the Knicks about the development of some of their players going forward. Next hour, we're going to talk some baseball. The Yankees on a roll, the Mets struggling. Up next, Colin Loughran joins us with the latest on NBA free agency as a whole. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Colin Lochran here with Nick DeLuca and Sam Davis, and I've got you covered with the latest headlines. Guys, it's great to be here. I had a lot of fun listening to you talk about the Knicks, the Nets, the Eastern Conference as a whole. So much going on, and I think you guys hit the nail on the head. The Eastern Conference is no longer the Eastern Conference. There's definitely a lot of improvement going around. So with that in mind, I want to start off in the East with the Miami Heat, who acquired Kyle Lowry through a sign and trade with the Toronto Raptors. The deal is set for 3 years and worth $90 million, solidifying a strong Miami backcourt. This comes in addition to the re-signing of Jimmy Butler and Duncan Robinson, as well as Victor Oladipo. And on top of that, they added free agent PJ Tucker, who, as Nick mentioned earlier, is a new NBA champion with the Milwaukee Bucks. Nick, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on Miami's offseason moves? Does this help build the kind of Heat culture that could potentially outwork a team like Brooklyn?
I'm going to start with, I love the Eastern Conference. That was outstanding. So I'm going to give you props on that one, Colin. Do I think that it's going to, I'll say it this way. I think the moves that Miami made were geared toward Brooklyn. I think that was what they were shooting for in seeing the way that PJ Tucker played defense against Kevin Durant in that series with Milwaukee against Brooklyn and the type of player that he is. Adding Kyle Lowry as a dude who can shoot is something that I think the Heat needed a little bit. And I like the moves. And, of course, Jimmy Butler, again, re-signing. He's a key cog. You're not doing anything without re-signing Jimmy Butler. So good on the Heat for doing that. Now, do I think that they are of the caliber of Brooklyn at the moment? No. And they made a number of good moves, but this is not a team that has that star power. I mean, we're still talking about Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden, and a team that the health is the big if. But again, we're talking on paper right now. So on paper, they're better. And we'll see, because it's no guarantee that the health is there. It hasn't been for the Nets. We just got done discussing that. But I don't think that these moves, as good as they are, I think it takes them up a notch. Are they in that tier with Milwaukee right now? I think so. I think they're on that level of Milwaukee. I think they certainly will compete with Philadelphia. And people forget this is a team that was just in the NBA Finals and then a down year last year. The move and the roster spot for me that fascinates about the Heat is Victor Oladipo, because he is a guy who, in my opinion, has a lot of untapped potential and a guy who can be a really strong piece with them alongside Jimmy Butler, alongside Bam Adebayo, alongside PJ Tucker and the moves that they're making, Duncan Robinson as well. So I really like having Victor Oladipo in the fold there. He is, I think, a guy who can come in and score in bunches and potentially give them that other option that I really like for them to have to compete with a team like Brooklyn that's going to score and shoot the lights out. But I'm still not there quite yet on this Miami team is good enough to take down Brooklyn at full strength, which is what we have to talk about right now.
Nick, I'm glad you said that the Heat are kind of at the Bucks level now, because last season, I mean, this past year in the playoffs, we saw what the Bucks did to this Miami Heat team. So I think kind of like what I mentioned with the Knicks, how they learned from their first round playoff exit and kind of got better in the offseason. The Heat did the exact same thing here. They really were embarrassed by the Bucks. Obviously, the Bucks went on to win the NBA Finals. But what happened in that series kind of proved what the Heat needed to do in the offseason, and getting Kyle Lowry is just huge. He's definitely going to help the team shooting the ball offensively for sure. Victor Oladipo, another really nice piece. And then, of course, like you mentioned, you have to make sure you extend Jimmy Butler. That's priority number one, and they did that. Duncan Robinson as well, getting him back is a very nice piece also to really round out, I think, a really solid starting five now, and a team that I definitely see competing up there with the Milwaukee Bucks. Maybe not with the Brooklyn Nets, because, of course, on paper, like we said, a fully healthy big three is unstoppable. But I think really the Heat are trying to go about this to just get back to winning playoff series and moving further in the playoffs, like you saw them do in the bubble. So for me, the Kyle Lowry move, I'm just really happy with them and what they did there, because he's going to help this team so much shooting. I mean, you saw what Lowry has meant to the Toronto Raptors and their organization, and they're already retiring his number. It's set to be for the Toronto Raptors. Just shows how important Kyle Lowry is to a franchise, and I think he's going to deliver something similar for the Miami Heat. No matter however long he's there, he's definitely a really nice piece for them, and I think the Heat really just jumped themselves right back into top of the East. Along, of course, maybe a step below Brooklyn, but right there with the Milwaukee Bucks and the Sixers and other teams as well up there in the Eastern Conference.
I would definitely agree with both of you guys. I don't think it's close talent-wise between Brooklyn and Miami. I think Brooklyn is far, far ahead. I mean, that's easy to say considering they have, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, James Harden on one team. Anytime you have those three guys together, you're going to be far ahead of your competition. I don't care who it is. But I will say this, Miami might be the toughest team in the Eastern Conference. Something about this roster to me just screams Rough Riders that are ready to get into a, low scoring 85-77 game that's high on defense, which is very rare in today's NBA. Something that puzzles me about these moves in particular. Why would you re-sign Oladipo, who, is a scorer? When he's right, Oladipo can score with the best of them. When you already have Jimmy Butler, who needs the ball to be successful. He's not a great off-ball guy. Guys, I'm wondering, are they concerned after last year's playoff performance with Butler, where he only shot 30% from the field? And not for nothing, this comes only a year after he had 22 a game in the bubble, which many people think is a myth. I'm wondering if Miami's trying to build a roster that's not necessarily the most talented, but maybe the most smart and the toughest, because Duncan Robinson, smart player, great signing, in my opinion. The things this guy does off the ball to get open and even with the ball to find his teammates in certain situations is remarkable, considering the guy was undrafted. So I'm wondering, what's your take on that? Is Miami a tough team, and does that help them at all or give them any points against teams that, are kind of scared to play physically?
Well, Colin, I want to jump in here real quick, because that's a great point. I think when a team like the Heat cannot quite match up talent-wise with somebody like Brooklyn Nets, for example, then you go into finding other ways to win games. And maybe in the way that the NBA is nowadays, with lots of scoring and high-scoring games, maybe a more defensive approach, maybe a more a tough style of play, kind of like you talked about. Maybe that's a way that the Heat can kind of find an advantage over a team like Brooklyn Nets or even the Milwaukee Bucks. And that's really an interesting point, because and then you mentioned, of course, with what happened with Jimmy Butler in the playoffs, I think the Heat are definitely aware and definitely all offseason were thinking about what happened in the playoffs last year. They definitely are using that as motivation to say, this is where we weren't good, this is where we need to get better. So whatever did happen, whatever they see, why they lost that series against the Milwaukee Bucks, and maybe it was just the Bucks were a better team at that point. The Heat recognized that and really felt they needed to get better, and that's where you see the moves like Kyle Lowry and Victor Oladipo. They're trying to do their best to score more, to be a better team offensively, to try and compete. But I think if they're looking for an advantage over some of these other really talent-laden teams like the Brooklyn Nets, maybe a tougher style of play or just a different style of play to the way that Brooklyn does it will help them kind of match up in the playoffs down the road.
I think it's important to remember who's building the Miami Heat right now. Pat Riley's an old school guy. And now that's not to say that if Kevin Durant were available, he wouldn't try and sign Kevin Durant, who's not that type of defensive grinder. But I think in absence of a top flight free agent, that's exactly what Pat Riley is going to do. And Jimmy Butler's a great player. I'm going to preface this by saying that. But I don't know that he is of the same caliber of this superstar type of player that exists throughout the rest of the NBA. I mean, Jimmy Butler averaged just under 22 points a game this year. That's 26th best in the NBA. 7 assists a game. That's 10th. But just, he's not a stat stuffer. He's a hard worker. And that, I think, from a mentality, locker room perspective, is important when matched with the right people. Like Jimmy Butler, he's outstanding for your culture. But is he somebody who, as option number 1, leads you to an NBA championship? I'm not sold on that. And I know that they were close, and I don't want to say throw out the bubble because it does count. It's a weird confluence of events. I'm just not sold that Jimmy Butler can be your number 1 option and lead you to an NBA championship. And he's very good. I'm not saying he's not good. And I think it's very similar to really a lot of the questions we've had about Giannis for a long time. He's a great player. He's a very good player, but where is that come postseason time, and where does that fall when he is really the guy who is your number 1 option? So I think Pat Riley recognizes that. I think he knows that. And if given the opportunity to pivot to a higher level of a superstar and perhaps move on from Jimmy Butler, he might consider that. Of course, that not an option right now, and I think everybody would do that. But it's interesting to me to see the way that they're building this thing, and it's similar to the way the Knicks are built a little bit. And of course, with a number of players who are just better than what the Knicks have right now. But this is a team that's trying to be a throwback a little bit. And I think Pat Riley might have been paying attention to, the Knicks, who came back with a lot of defense. They were able to have a lot of success last year when coached the right way. There's a lot of confidence that Eric Spoelstra will do that, will accomplish that. So maybe give it a run. Milwaukee was a team that was much better defensively as well. And we see the success that they were able to have. So I think this is a good move for Miami, just in terms of an identity shift. And I do think this is the way that you do have to build around Jimmy Butler, because if you're thinking you're going to try and build up a Golden State or that type of team, or a Brooklyn in that way, I don't think it's going to work. You need to be better defensively. This is a team that has to win the way that Toronto won in 2019 and the way Milwaukee won this year. They're not going to win like a Golden State. They're not going to win like a superstar team. They're not that caliber. They won't win like a Brooklyn.
Certainly, I think it remains to be seen whether or not Jimmy Butler is that number 1 option long-term for Miami. But Nick, I have to mention something that you brought up, was that Pat Riley is an old school guy. You're 100% correct. If anyone's going to understand that work can beat talent, it's going to be Pat Riley. I mean, just look at this guy's coaching history, the 80s Lakers, Showtime, who, by the way, lost to a scrappy Celtics team in 84 that was not as talented as the Showtime Lakers. Riley has gone on record saying that series really was the catalyst for those Lakers teams going forward to get more physical, to get tougher, and to really play with a more aggressive style of ball. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with Miami going forward. But they're not the only team in the East that's gotten better over the past couple days here in the beginning of August. Moving to our next headline, the Chicago Bulls have acquired both Lonzo Ball and DeMar DeRozan via sign and trades. Lonzo's deal was worth 4 years and $85 million, while DeRozan will sign the dotted line for 3 years and $85 million plus. So this creates a very interesting situation for Chicago. They now have Ball, DeRozan, and LaVine all on the same roster. Guys, what's your take on the Bulls this upcoming season? Can you see them making the playoffs? If so, can they make anything that resembles a run at a championship? What do you think?
There is.
Go ahead, Nick.
Go ahead. Well, there's value to being a contender, and I think that that's what Chicago is shooting for right now, just because of how difficult it's been for them over the last number of years. Just this is a proud organization, and MJ in the 90s Bulls. I mean, this is a big basketball city that is, I think, down a little bit on the Bulls recently just because of an inability to get anything going. They haven't been good since Derrick Rose and Tom Thibodeau were there. So it's been a long time since the Bulls have been good. But do I think that they enter the conversation as a top team in the East? No. These moves are a little confusing to me because I'm not 100% sure that I understand where DeMar DeRozan, Lonzo Ball, and Alex Caruso fit into the fold here. I think that they can improve them on the margins. Can they earn a playoff spot? Sure. They were, on the door of the play-in tournament this past year. So at 11th finishing, can they jump over the Hornets and Pacers? Wizards will not be as good. I mean, sure, but 76ers, Nets, Bucks, Knicks, Hawks, Heat, Celtics are better than them still. Maybe, can they edge out New Orleans? Sure. But this team, I don't think is for a lot of talk about them going to be any semblance of, all right, now they're a contender. I think Lonzo Ball is a good addition for them. DeMar DeRozan certainly makes them better, but how much better remains to be seen, and I don't think it's a lot.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I just want to preface what I say with they do get a lot better. I mean, that's something that obviously I think anybody can say. Lonzo Ball, I mean, obviously he was disappointing with the Lakers, but his numbers have gotten better, and it seems like it's a trend where they're going to continue to get better, both offensively and then also limiting turnovers as well. So that's a big part of this too. I mean, he's certainly a player that I think is going to get a lot better, and he's going to improve with the Chicago Bulls. And DeMar DeRozan, another solid player that adds talent to your team, along with Levine, Vucevic, go down the list there. I mean, it's a pretty solid team in terms of talent-wise, but I was also very confused with these moves because it seems like they're going all in, and that's what, especially with what they've given up for guys like DeRozan. I mean, not only have they signed him for lots of money, but they're giving up draft picks, and it seems like, for me, it looks like a team that is really trying to vault themselves to near the top of the Eastern Conference, but they're not at the top of the Eastern Conference. I mean, they're still not there with all those teams you listed, Nick, to be honest. I mean, the Nets, the Bucks, go down the list. Plenty of teams there above the Bulls right now. So that's what confused me with these moves, I guess. I thought it was definitely good because it makes the Bulls competitive. It makes them better. It makes them potentially a playoff team. I think with the play-in, I would be surprised if they don't make it at this point, just with the talent on their roster. But for me, I mean, I question it because they're playing to go all in, but they're still a step or two below the top teams in the Eastern Conference, which is where I think, is it worth giving up first-round draft picks or second-round draft picks or spending this much money when you're not really putting yourself in contention to win a championship? You're still kind of a little bit of a ways off. So that's where the moves confuse me, but they do get better, and I guess that's something you can't really criticize.
Undeniable that the Bulls will be better this upcoming season. And I would agree with you guys that, they're still not anywhere near that top tier of the East with the Brooklyns and Milwaukee. But I must say, I think this team's moves made a lot of sense for me personally. Maybe not so much in terms of trying to compete next year, but I think down the road, these moves are going to make sense. I mean, year after year, DeMar DeRozan plays games. For the most part, the guy stays healthy and shoots 45 to 50%, around that range from the field. He's never been a great three-point shooter, but he's got a good mid-range game. Levine has just come off what it was a amazing season for him. I mean, 27 points a game. The numbers don't lie, guys. And I'll say Lonzo Ball has room to develop. I mean, when this guy was at UCLA, everyone praised him about how good of a passer he was, his court vision, things like that, didn't necessarily translate 100% his first couple of years in the NBA, but that has room to grow, room to get better, especially when you put DeRozan around him and you put a guy like Nikola Vucevic, who, by the way, is supremely underrated in my estimation. I mean, what more could you want from your center than 21 points a game and 11 rebounds? There's some centers that won't even get you 1 point a game and 5 rebounds that are starting. I think this team is one of the wackier teams this year because they really don't have the spacing to be a great three-point shooting team. And there's no one that really screams he's a threat from behind the arc, but their mid-range game has a chance to be one of the best in the league this year. And it really hasn't been something that a lot of teams have tried since, the early 2000s, mid 2000s, that era. I think they're not anywhere near the top this year. But I think what happens is that you become a destination that future free agents want to play for. I mean, it is the Chicago Bulls. There is history there. MJ in the 90s was great. I think guys will be attracted to this team as they continue to progress. Is there any merit to that, do you guys think? Is there a chance that free agents will want to come play in Chicago if they know they're on the rise?
I'm just not sure what free agents are going to come there with what money are they going to be paid. That to me is the issue. I just think that the Bulls are running themselves into a tough spot cap-wise here, where maybe there is a free agent that wants to go there or play with some of the other players that they've accumulated, but there's no space. And this reminds me a little bit, the players that they have brought in are much better than anyone that the Knicks of forever ago were bringing in. But it reminds me a little bit of some of the mistakes that the Knicks have made, where you want to be competitive, you're tired of losing, but you're not really making moves that advance you toward an NBA championship. It's really just advancing you to a low ceiling playoff appearance. And that's how I feel about what the Bulls are doing right now, because when you look at it, teams are finding success in the NBA, and I'll keep it to the Eastern Conference, one of two ways. It's through really drafting and developing some young talent and growing them into superstars, or it's signing top-tier free agents and really making the correct investment. Look at Philadelphia. They draft Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. The Nets, we've gone through it a million times, but the signing of Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, you trade for James Harden. Okay, those are free agent investments, but those are top-level talents. The Bucks, they draft and develop Giannis Antetokounmpo and build around him. The Knicks, it's the smart free agent play with Julius Randle, and they're not overextending themselves, giving themselves an opportunity and the room to grow and get better. The Hawks, we draft and develop Trae Young and build around him. So I think there is something to be said for just the salary cap situation that the Bulls are putting themselves in, and NBA history is not kind to them in the way that they're trying to build this roster.
Yeah, that's the thing I think as well. And then also, I mean, we mentioned Lonzo Ball. There's also concerns with him injury-wise because he hasn't played a full season since coming into the NBA. So that's something for a young player. That's a concern as well, especially a guy that you're putting a lot of money towards going into this coming season. I agree. That's why these moves confuse me, because of the scale of them, because of everything that they were giving up, both draft picks, whatever, players, but as well as financially, the commitment they were making to guys like DeMar DeRozan and Lonzo Ball, really solid players that are going to help them right now and could be a foundation for maybe landing a superstar in free agency for sure going forward. But like you said, Nick, that they really have the money to do so. I don't know how that's going to work out. I'm not sure how that shapes out. If they do find a way to land a star, then all of a sudden, I mean, you're looking at this team a lot differently, and you certainly are looking at them as maybe a contender in the East. But right now, I think you can't look at them that way, and they're going to be better, but not better enough, if that makes sense, to be for everything that they gave up, I think, for these moves.
Last thing for me on this, also important to remember, we talked about Pat Riley with the Heat, Jerry Reinsdorf at the top with Chicago, not a guy who is known to be, if you watch The Last Dance, very patient. I'm sure he's tired of losing, but also somebody who may not be the most calculated. I'm not sure what played where in terms of, we got to go win or we're going to do this. This is the same dude who wanted Tony La Russa to manage the White Sox. So we'll see where that falls for them. But I wouldn't be surprised that he's putting pressure on people to say, yeah, I don't really care that DeMar DeRozan is going to lead me to a championship. I just want to get better right now.
With that ownership, this is bound to be a fascinating situation that's going to be a treat to watch. It's going to be cool to see. And I think there's many, many ways that this could go, good, bad, ugly, but that remains to be seen. Finally, our biggest set of headlines from the NBA this week, in my opinion, comes from a Western Conference power, the Los Angeles Lakers. Earlier in the week, the Lakers signed both Carmelo Anthony and Dwight Howard to one-year deals. This comes in addition to other Tinseltown acquisitions such as Russell Westbrook, Kendrick Nunn, and Malik Monk. Sam, I'll swing it to you first. Do the moves from Melo and Dwight Howard help LA's chances of winning a championship, or are they just adding age to a team that might have needed youth more than anything else?
I think they help their chances. I mean, I think the Lakers are set up to have a really interesting season that a lot of people are interested to see play out, because certainly there are more veterans than younger players, and especially with what they've done this offseason. I mean, you already have the age of LeBron James and Anthony Davis as well, and then you're building around those guys. But guys like Carmelo Anthony, guys like Dwight Howard, who you mentioned there, Colin, that are certainly veteran presences. But for me, the Lakers needed shooting, and Russell Westbrook didn't quite provide that, which is why people were a little confused as to, how he was going to play. First of all, how he's going to play alongside LeBron and AD, and also what he was going to provide really for this Lakers team. I mean, he's a really solid player, but they still needed shooting. Maybe Carmelo Anthony fits that role as well, but you also have Trevor Ariza as well, Kent Bazemore, other guys that are I think will help overall with the shooting for this Lakers team. But there's also, I mean, it's certainly a little bit more of a balance of veterans, but there are some young players that they're able to get. I mean, Kendrick Nunn and Malik Monk are two guys that younger presences that I think will learn a lot from these veterans and will really contribute very well to this Lakers team and kind of make that balance a little bit more even between veterans and younger players. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But the bottom line with the Lakers is, if you have LeBron and Anthony Davis healthy, I mean, they're at the top of the Western Conference, and you have to think of them as finals contenders for sure, with those two guys. And then anything else you can get from these veterans, and Dwight Howard, I think you can get quite a lot from him. He's going to help the team out a lot. And then some of the younger players as well, like Kendrick Nunn. Whatever you can get from those guys, you take, and maybe some shooting, and then Russell Westbrook also. So I think the Lakers are in a pretty good position. There is some risk in taking a lot of veterans like this, especially just with the way the NBA is played nowadays in fast-paced offensive basketball. But it's a good risk to take, I think, because you have plenty of options shooting the basketball. You have veterans, which will help some of the younger players. And then on top of all that, I mean, you can't go anywhere without saying LeBron and Anthony Davis and everything that they can provide to this team. So overall, I think what they did this offseason is going to help them going forward. We'll see.
Yeah, it is interesting that this narrative is being floated around that the Lakers are too old, but it's LeBron James. Like, yeah, I know he's 36 going on 37 years old, but he's still LeBron. So I don't think that that's just your normal older player or veteran player. And Anthony Davis still 28 years old, so no concern there, save for some of the injury issues that you've seen from him over the last few years. But I do like what they have done. I think they, in a very similar vein to what we talked about with Brooklyn, it's just about the health, because LeBron, a guy who has been as durable as anyone for the first however many years of his career, be it 10 to 15, has had some injury issues the last couple of years crop up. So is he going to be able to stay healthy? And perhaps that is part of the age discussion, but I don't think it's a talent or a level of play discussion as much as it is just, is he going to be able to stay healthy conversation. So I think that I really do like what the Lakers have done. I think Russell Westbrook can add a lot for them, because let's just think about this for a moment. There's a lot of criticism levied on Russell Westbrook, the player, and some of the empty stats, and he hasn't done enough to carry the team, and he's not a modern NBA basketball player because he can't shoot from beyond the arc, and he's that different type of point guard. But he's not going to be a dude who's going to have to come in and score a ton for this Lakers team. And I think that's going to help him a lot. Think about him as a third option. That's pretty good. So I like them bringing in Russell Westbrook, a dude who's going to come in and I think be able to play a little bit better defense with some of that pressure taken off of him, a guy we know who can pass the basketball with all the triple doubles that he's accumulated. So I do think that he's going to be a productive fit in the fold with the Lakers, and now it's about the shooting. I think that is the one question for them. Are they going to be able to supplement that everywhere? I like the name that you brought up, Sam, and Trevor Ariza, because I think he is somebody who can add a lot for them in terms of length in defense, a 3-and-D guy who played very well for Houston back in the day too, filling a similar role with James Harden and Chris Paul. So I do like that move. The question is going to be for them, the shooting, But I do think that bringing in some of the locker room guys that they have been able to acquire, whether it be the Russell Westbrook, whether it be the Dwight Howard, I think will be very productive for them. And the ceiling again for them is NBA champions. They should be right back there again, save that they're healthy. The Western Conference this time around feels like it's more wide open than it has been in a long time. We talked about how good the East has been. Well, the West is a little bit more wide open. I'm still not ready to say that it's less than the East. I'm not there yet, Alex Wools, but I will say that with the combination of the Lakers potentially getting healthy, and what are the Suns going to look like with Chris Paul and Devin Booker running it back, and some of the other teams in the fold, Golden State, I have no idea what to expect from them, whether Klay Thompson's going to come back healthy enough with two of the injuries that he suffered. Can he be that type of player that's that number two to help Steph Curry really compete in the West? So there's just so many unanswered questions, but I do think the Lakers are still up top there and certainly should be there to compete. And then, of course, you've got Utah and Denver and the Clippers and the Mavs as well, some teams that had some disappointing playoff exits. So we'll see where the rest of it falls. But I do like what I've seen from the Lakers, and I think they're right at the top of the West, granted that they stay healthy.
Without a doubt, as long as LeBron and Anthony Davis stay somewhat healthy come postseason time, I'd say as long as they're able to play come postseason time, especially now with the addition of Westbrook, this team should be able to win a championship in theory, or at least should be able to meet a team like Brooklyn in the finals. Because Russell Westbrook is still a triple-double machine. He has the ability to give you 20, 10, and 10 every night he steps on the court. And Sam, you brought something up earlier I'd like to highlight. Kendrick Nunn is a great addition. Under the radar guy, he can give you 14 a night. I mean, and who knows, with a little bit of mentoring from a guy like LeBron or even an older presence like Melo, he might be able to continue to grow and become more of a reliable three-point shooter and more of a reliable player in general. I think this team is the best team in the Western Conference on paper, as long as they stay healthy. I do think there is something to be said about the age of some of their supporting cast. I mean, Melo and Dwight Howard are on the older side. LeBron is getting up there, but as you said, Nick, he is still LeBron James. I think it's something that you can keep your eye on as the season progresses, that this is an older team. But for the most part, the Lakers should be set with this season going forward. I think they can make another run at a championship this year.
Yeah, the fact that you're looking at Russell Westbrook as not to be that guy on this team. I mean, you have LeBron and AD, and then it's Russell Westbrook. That's a really solid number three option. I mean, that for all the criticism that went around with the signing, with getting Russell Westbrook. I mean, you got to think about what he does bring to this team. And you're right, it's going to be triple doubles, and he can do that basically every night. So him not having to be the superstar, not having to be the leader of this team, but just have to settle into kind of a different role. I think he's going to embrace that. And I think he's really going to help this team a lot. And then you add the veteran presence and combine that with, I think Kendrick Nunn is going to gain a lot from having all these veterans around. I mean, who wouldn't, a younger player like that? And same with Malik Monk. Guys that haven't been in the league too long, but can learn so much from just playing on the court with a guy like LeBron James, or playing on the court with Dwight Howard or Carmelo Anthony. Guys that can really teach these younger stars a lot about the game. In addition to that, they're going to provide valuable minutes, I think, for this Lakers team going forward. A team that they're going to have to watch out with the veterans in terms of how many minutes they play per night, and whether any injuries or something like that comes into the factor. Being careful with LeBron and AD and making sure they're fully healthy. In the regular season, great. Yeah, you would like to have them as healthy as possible, but most importantly, come playoff time, that's when you need these guys to be fully healthy. And if they are, the Lakers are certainly up there and present a really good challenge if they do face off with the Nets in the NBA Finals.
To me, the health is the question. We'll see if the Lakers are able to stay healthy. I like the moves. I think we got a consensus that this is a team that has gotten better. So we'll see where that leaves the Lakers with the rest of the Western Conference. Later on in this hour, we talk to Pat O'Keefe, the anchor and sports director at News 12. Can hear him on NBA radio and 98.7 ESPN radio. But up next, we talk some baseball. The Yankees playing well. They've won 8 out of 10. The Mets, not so much. They've lost 7 out of 10. We'll get to all that and more next, right here on One on One.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York, right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org.
Second hour, one-on-one, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Nick DeLuca, Sam Davis, Colin Lochran with the headlines. Alex Wolz, our producer. We're going to talk some baseball. The Yankees playing much better of late, winners of 8 out of 10. The Mets have lost 7 of their last 10 ball games. But some news to get to right out of the gate here. The Yankees have just placed Aroldis Chapman on the injured list with left elbow inflammation. So a key member of their bullpen headed to the IL.
Yeah, that's a shock right off the jump there. Yeah, I mean, say what you want about Chapman and what he in the rough stretch I guess he has had earlier in the season. He's still a extremely important part of this bullpen, a bullpen that I think we saw it last night. They've kind of had to do a lot, really, especially with some of the lack of depth in the starting rotation at the moment. So that's something to look out for just in the short term here, as the Yankees are in a deep hole, so they still have to keep winning and are doing so without some of their valuable starting pitchers. We'll see how that bullpen plays out. Not sure who's going to get the call in replacement of Chapman, but you can't really replace your closer that throws 100 miles an hour. So certainly a tough loss for the Yankees.
Yeah, such an interesting dynamic for the Yankees, who have just gone up and down the roller coaster this year, and some of the really difficult losses and then playing better in this stretch, all while having to deal with the COVID issues that they have undergone with some of the players testing positive. Garrett Cole still on the COVID IL, Jordan Montgomery there as well, and also making those moves to see Joey Gallo and Anthony Rizzo into the fold and win 7 out of 8 since they were brought in. So just a wide range of emotions to try and find a way to explain what this Yankees season has been, but certainly a big blow in losing their closer, Aroldis Chapman, not to COVID, but to an injury. And this is a team that has just had to keep plugging away. And that, I think, contributes to some of the feeling that you just don't know how to feel about this Yankees team, because such a difficult start. They've started to pick it up. They're still not really hitting. This is not a team that's supposed to pitch as well as it has, but it has. They're pitching well without their ace, Garrett Cole. So there's just so much. And I skipped this part of it. Their bullpen that was supposed to be locked down has struggled, but also had injuries and COVID. And there's just so much to unpack. So playing better baseball of late, Chapman being gone certainly won't help them. But at the very least, keeping pace in the American League playoff picture, they are right on the doorstep of the second wild card with Oakland and a win last night that was big time for the Yankees. Really a game that they had no business winning, being shut out for a majority of the ball game, finally able to scratch across a couple of runs and eventually winning it in the 11th on a Brett Gardner walk-off single. But it's just odd to see the Yankees continue to not be able to do much with the bats and yet still find a way to win.
Yeah, that's been the question all year. It's like when are the bats going to come alive, and when is the pitching going to kind of return to normal? And when is you have Garrett Cole at the top, who actually has been inconsistent compared to guys like Jameson Taillon, who recently have just been dominant, almost like. And then you have Jordan Montgomery, who's been pitched very well also. And then you have Corey Kluber before he was injured. So the thought was, okay, the offense is eventually going to figure things out and the pitching staff's going to regress and return to normal. But that hasn't happened both ways. I mean, the Yankees are still finding a way to win ball games. And I think a lot of the credit to winning right now has to do with the Rizzo and Gallo moves. Not just on the field. I mean, we've seen on the field what they provide. Everyone can see, especially offensively, what a guy like Anthony Rizzo has done. He's hit very well for the Yankees, and they've won quite a lot of games since they got Rizzo and Gallo. But also, I think for the rest of the guys on this team, getting kind of a vote of confidence from the front office to say, Brian Cashman saying essentially to this team with Rizzo and Gallo, we believe in not just Rizzo and Gallo, but we believe in every other guy in the clubhouse. And we believe that you guys are a playoff team. That's why they're making these moves. And I think that's a huge vote of confidence for the rest of this Yankees team. And you can see it kind of play out and how well they've been playing baseball as of late. Having fun. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but something the Yankees really haven't done all season. It seems like they've just kind of sleptwalked through this point, and now they're starting to really have fun. The crowds are getting bigger at Yankee Stadium. Fans are just getting more excited to be around this team. And listen, if the pitching can continue to produce the way they have been, you don't need the lineup to step up, and you don't need the lineup to be better than they are, although you would definitely like them to be better than they are, because DJ LeMahieu is a guy that certainly needs to step up and play better. Gleyber Torres has started to play better. Stanton, getting a couple big hits. Aaron Judge has played decent. I mean, all these guys have done, played pretty decent, and this lineup hasn't been terrible, but there's still a long way to go, I think, for this lineup. And that's the bottom line. If they can find a way to just start producing more runs offensively, start being a little bit better with runners in scoring position. I mean, we've seen that all year. That's been a big problem for them. Certainly a problem for the New York Mets as well, but not getting into them yet. But with this Yankees team, I mean, if the pitching is going to keep producing, you have to be confident in them to really make a wild card or even make a run at the division. But that's a lot to ask. And it's a lot to ask out of the bullpen as well, to kind of pick up big innings night after night after night. You would like this offense to improve, but I mean, overall, you can't not be confident with just the way this team is playing and how much fun they're having and just what Gallo and Rizzo bring both on the field and off the field.
Yeah, it's interesting. And if we go back a little while, a couple series ago, a couple weeks, the Yankees got a no-hitter through 7+ innings from Domingo Germán, and then ultimately lost a 4-0 lead in a heartbreaker to Boston, a 5-run 8th inning, and then shut down in the 9th and not able to win. And it was striking because there was a lot of conversation at the time that about as well as Boston had played the entire summer, and then the Yankees were scuffling. And I believe it was Paul O'Neill on Yes Network said, what is really driving this Red Sox team? What's going on? Why are they really overachieving? Is it Alex Cora coming in? Like, what is this? Because this is not too different. They are better than they were last year, but this is not a team that should be running away with the division. And what Michael Kay said was in listening to some of the reporting that was being done in Boston was that this was a team that was just having a ton of fun, that you could feel it from the Yankee perspective in their dugout, was having so much fun, enjoying playing with one another, and that was moving the needle. And you feel like the Yankees have gotten some of that with an Anthony Rizzo. And I saw a tweet from Talking Yanks too, which was very interesting to me, because the Yankees, since acquiring Rizzo and Gallo, are 7-1. And since the Red Sox were rumored to get Anthony Rizzo, they're 1-6. Now, correlation does not equal causation. That doesn't mean that it's 100% the driving force behind certainly the Red Sox not getting Anthony Rizzo and then, of course, subsequently not playing well. But it is interesting to me, the energy, the fun that exists, that extra part of baseball that does not appear in analytics, just the culture in the clubhouse and the feeling and the confidence and all the stuff that goes with it. And I think that Brian Cashman might have seen that a little bit. That was something that was talked about in 2009 when they brought in CC Sabathia, not about simply being that frontline starter, but also a dude who was going to come in and change their culture. They had a bad locker room and they needed to get better and more with it. And that's what CC Sabathia brought. And I don't know that Anthony Rizzo is necessarily going to have that same type of impact. Hard to, with how well CC Sabathia pitched in 2009, just as a first baseman. But you feel like Rizzo and Gallo have brought something new to this locker room that has really turned things around.
I'm glad you brought up the Red Sox, because I think there's something to be said about, at the deadline, when you make a big move like Anthony Rizzo or Joey Gallo, having them walk into that clubhouse and just how excited it makes the other Yankees players around them. And we talked about how important it was, sure, for Rizzo and Gallo to produce, but more importantly for the guys that were already in the clubhouse to change things around. And it didn't look like throughout the first 100 games or maybe even more and into the end of July, it didn't look like, sure, the Yankees at times had shown that they were a much better team, but it didn't look like they could consistently put together win series after series. And that was just, it must have been, it wasn't the talent on the field. It wasn't the guys that they were bringing out in the lineup every night. It must have been something different, I guess, at that point. And then you bring in Joey Gallo, you bring in Anthony Rizzo, and all of a sudden it just gives these guys a lot more confidence. And now you're starting to see that they are putting series together and they are consistently winning baseball games, which is really all they needed to do. And it's not too late for them to do that. And I think combine that with the Red Sox struggles right now, and the Red Sox didn't do a whole lot at the deadline. They did get Kyle Schwarber, a move that will help, but he's not playing right now. He's still hurt. And Chris Sale, another guy that the Red Sox desperately need back, he's still not back. So right now, the Red Sox are kind of in limbo where they haven't had any immediate effects from the deadline. They were having fun all year. Now the Yankees are starting to play better, and things are slipping for the Red Sox, especially the pitching has kind of fell off. And you start to think, well, maybe if they made a different move at the deadline and had someone impact the team right away, we would be in a different scenario with Boston Red Sox. But, I mean, I guess that's all hypothetical. But with this Red Sox team, I think with Kyle Schwarber and with Chris Sale, you might see them start to turn things around. But it looks like if the Yankees are going to make the playoffs, and I'm curious to see what you think about this, Nick, but if the Yankees are going to make the playoffs, for me, I think it is the Red Sox that would fall out. It's not the A's. I think the A's are a regular season winning machine. They find a way to win regular season games. I mean, Laureano, his suspension, that definitely hurts, but you got a guy like Starling Marte. That was a huge move for them at the deadline. And then the Rays, another team that just finds a way to win regular season games. They play really well against the Yankees. So for me, I think if the Red Sox continue to slide, that would be an obvious gap for the Yankees to kind of step in and make that wild card. But for me, that is their best avenue towards the playoffs. I don't know how you feel, though.
Yeah, the best avenue is certainly the wild card right now, although they do have a number of games against Tampa Bay remaining. So there's the potential to make up the ground if they really get on a run. Now, that's a big if, and is some of this stuff sustainable?
And the offense needs to produce better if they're going to get on a run. Yeah.
Right. So the offense will need to make it sustainable to play a little bit better. So we'll see if they're able to accomplish that. I think the history of this season would tell you it's not terribly likely, but you never know. The point is that, yes, because if the Yankees, it's in part just the scheduling of the whole thing. The Yankees have a number of games against the Red Sox too. So it's the Red Sox and the Rays just from a scheduling perspective. And if the Yankees are going to make up the ground to be able to get into the playoffs, it's likely that they're going to be doing a lot of that winning against the Red Sox. So I don't think that that's a bad, feeling to have at all. I don't necessarily disagree with you. And it's I think fair to say that the Red Sox have overachieved. This is just not a team that a lot of people feel like was that good coming into the season. Would they have challenged for a wild card berth? Sure. Would they have made it to the playoffs? Sure. But I don't think this was a team that too many people had pegged as this is the side that wins the division. Yankees certainly the favorite, and I think the Rays were number 2 in that area, and perhaps the Blue Jays even thought in higher regard than the way the Red Sox were held coming into the season after such a difficult year last year. Certainly surprising some people. I think Alex Cora has meant a lot to their locker room coming back. But no, I wouldn't be shocked if the Red Sox aren't able to make the playoffs. They've had a very good year to this point, but the struggles occur. And again, it's a small sample size. It's a rough stretch. So will they be able to get back on track? Are the Yankees going to be able to continue to play this type of baseball? I don't know. Only time will tell. But I think there is the need to taper some of the expectations and the feelings just a touch because of the small sample size and the nature of baseball. Tapering expectations, a good way to get into the Mets here. They've lost 7 of their last 10 ball games, a difficult loss last night late in the game. And now on the outside looking in at the top of the division, the Philadelphia Phillies taking over atop the National League East. Is it time to panic for the Mets, who have really struggled? The offense hasn't been there. The pitching has come crashing down to earth with the loss of Jacob deGrom.
Yeah. I mean, Nick, I'm going to be totally honest. I'm watching the New York Mets last night, and I was miserable, being completely honest. It was just not a fun feeling. With this Mets team, it's like they get down 2-1, and you feel like the game is over. And then on Friday night, they get down 4-1. And it's okay. It's definitely over now. So much for a comeback there. The Mets, it starts with the offense. I mean, you can say what you want about the pitching, and the pitching depth is a little thin right now. And I think what happens is, when you have Jacob deGrom at the top of a rotation, and when you had in the first half, Taijuan Walker was dealing, Marcus Stroman was dealing, that's a really dominant 1-2-3 there. The Mets offense doesn't have to do too much. They have to score 3-4 runs a night. That's it at the most. And they're going to win more than half of the games they play, especially in kind of a weak division. And they're going to jump out to first place. And that's exactly what happened. But when deGrom is hurt, when Taijuan Walker starts to struggle, and kind of, this is the most innings he's thrown since 2018, which is a big thing to note there. So when he struggles, and Stroman even has been a little up and down, although he has kind of corrected that and figured that out, the Mets offense has nowhere to hide. They have nowhere to go. And you're seeing now with runners in scoring position, the Mets, I lead the league in getting the bases loaded with nobody out and then finding a way not to score. I didn't even think that was possible, but they just find, to me, sorry, I'm going on a rant a little bit here, but the Mets offense, the bottom line, that is where things need to change. There's no excuses anymore. The lineup is basically fully healthy. I mean, you're missing Francisco Lindor, but he didn't hit too much anyway when he was in the lineup, so you're basically fully healthy. It's kind of like we've talked about with the Yankees in terms of having a good lineup. The lineup itself can be good and should produce at least, maybe not best or top 10 in the American League or top 10 in baseball, but at least middle of the pack. That's really all you need with how good this pitching staff has been. And the reason I say I'm a little panicked is because you're not going to get Jake deGrom back until September. And this is a really important stretch from today's August 7th until the end of August. That's a big stretch of time where the Mets need to play at least 500 baseball, and to at least keep themselves within striking distance of the Phillies or Braves, whoever is leading the division, or at least keep a division lead of some sort. So that is where I'm concerned. The next 3 weeks, before Jacob deGrom returns, before Noah Syndergaard gets back, where the Mets are going to have to figure things out offensively, and they're going to have to figure it out quick.
I was curious. I was doing a little digging here. The Mets have scored the second fewest runs in the major leagues. So
yeah, they've been that way almost all season. It's them and I think the Pittsburgh Pirates right there in the bottom for runs per game. And it hasn't changed. That's the thing. It really hasn't been. The Mets offense hasn't dominated at times. It's just been they've been hidden kind of by a really dominant starting pitching staff. And you're starting to see the weaknesses now.
Yeah, so they'll have to hopefully for their sake get Jacob deGrom back and try and iron things out there. But it's a rough stretch. I'm with you 100% in there are a lot of things that were covered up, and now being in a spot where Jacob deGrom isn't there to bail you out, you have to figure out another way to skin the cat, and the Mets offense needs to pick it up. When you lose a guy of the caliber of Jacob deGrom, everyone else needs to step up, and the Mets haven't been able to do that. The bullpen has faltered a bit lately as well. It was very surprising to me to not see the Mets make a move to try and improve the bullpen at the deadline as well. I would have thought that they should have been all over a Brad Hand who gets dealt to Toronto, and maybe they were in those conversations, tough to tell. But I would have thought that would have been a place that they could have improved as well. But a difficult stretch, and seeing if they can get it back on track. It's just a rough spot for them to be in. And at the same time, as frustrating as it's been, still light at the end of the tunnel because of how weak that division has been. It is really underwhelmed. We talked at the beginning of this year about, is the NL East the best division in baseball? Well, it hasn't been this year, I'll tell you that. And the Braves have continued to struggle, and the Phillies overtaking the lead in the division, but the Phillies by no means are any juggernaut. Yeah. They really struggle in the bullpen and have some weaknesses that they need to cover up. A lineup that I think carries the weight there, and a couple of top end starters. But by no way are the Mets out of this division race, but at the same time need to start playing better, because I think the expectation is a little bit higher than simply winning a weaker NL East this season. So we'll see if the Mets can accomplish that and start playing some better baseball as things go forward and work out of a 7 losses in 10 game stretch. Later on, some headlines with Colin Loughran with the latest from NFL camps. And up next, Pat O'Keefe joins us, anchor and sports director at News 12. Can hear him on NBA radio and 98.7 ESPN radio. We talk to him next, right here on One on One.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Our pleasure to be joined by Pat O'Keefe, sports director and news anchor at News 12, heard on NBA radio and 98.7 ESPN right here in New York. Pat, thanks so much for taking some time today. How are you?
I'm great. It's always great to be on with the guys at FUV, so I hope you guys are doing well.
Well, we appreciate you coming on. Yes, doing well, and I know Sam is as well. So I wanted to start with the Yankees' success, and winners of 8 of their last 10 after some trade deadline movement and the acquisitions playing a big part with some impact from Anthony Rizzo and, of course, Joey Gallo last night. How do you feel that this Yankee team has improved with those two coming into the fold?
I mean, the first improvement is obviously what Rizzo and Gallo bring to the table with their own production. But what this has had the feeling of since the trade deadline last week when these moves were announced, somewhat surprisingly, I didn't expect the Yankees to be sellers, but I didn't expect them to be as aggressive as they were. These reminded me, if you go back 15, 20 years ago, the great Yankee teams, which yet technically are part of this run because the Yankees have never been bad going back to 1995, but it's not the same now that it was 15 years ago. But these moves remind me of what they used to do 15, 20 years ago. What they would do is they would always be aggressive at the deadline. They would always find that one or two big name piece or pieces that they need. Not only would those guys more often than not come in to contribute, but what they would do is they would kind of raise the level of play of everyone around them. And that's what's happened here. I think is as important as what Rizzo and Gallo have done on the field. It was kind of a message from Cashman, from Hal Steinbrenner, from the front office saying that, hey, we're not going to give up on this team yet. And I think the players have really taken that to heart. Rizzo and Gallo have been good. Rizzo's been fantastic, but I think everybody else has kind of gotten better too.
Yeah, that's certainly a big part of a trade deadline acquisition. It's all about not only what they provide on the field, but also off the field. And we've seen it here. Now, looking ahead for the Yankees, and the wild card seems, it's crazy to say this already. If you heard this a couple weeks ago, it would have been crazy to hear. But the wild card is certainly in reach. Is the division in reach? That's my question here. Do you think the Yankees have a shot to get back in the AL East?
I do, because as much, well, let's start with the Red Sox, and they're in second place right now. They're in the first wild card position. I mean, you go back to the Yankees have had so many brutal losses, even in the last month and a half, okay? Go back to what was, I think, their fourth low point of the season. It was the Sunday, I think it was July 25th, Domingo Germán takes a no-hitter into the eighth inning, and the Yankees end up not only losing the no-hitter, they end up losing the game. And that was like their fourth gut punch loss in the span of about 3 weeks. But since that day, the Yankees have gone 8-2, and the Red Sox have gone 3-7. And that has corresponded with the trade deadline. The Red Sox were said to be interested in Anthony Rizzo. The Yankees made the move to get Anthony Rizzo. And I think that's a big part of it. So the Yankees have made up 5 games on the Red Sox in the span of 10 days. And during that same time frame, Tampa Bay has gone 5-4. So they've made up 2.5 games on Tampa Bay. Now, Tampa's a more talented team. I think for most of the season, Boston has been playing a little bit ahead of where they project to be. So I definitely think the Yankees, Boston is there to be caught. Is the lead for Tampa too great to overcome? It might be, especially considering the talent and really the structure on their roster. But I wouldn't say the division title is out of the question at this point.
For Yankee fans, this season has seemed to be a bit of a roller coaster, coming in with World Series expectations and then seeing them struggle throughout the first half and now pick things up again. I don't know if we're back to the point where we feel like this is a team that can still compete and ultimately win a World Series. But I'm curious, in your mind, Pat, if this latest stretch, 8 wins in their last 10 games, has changed your mind about how far you think this team can go.
It has, because even if you go back to around July 4th, and that was 3 weeks before the trade deadline, that's when they started playing well. They had that split doubleheader against the Mets. Game 1 was another one of those brutal losses where Aroldis Chapman imploded and the Mets won in extra innings. Yankees salvaged the nightcap of that. And then they went on that road trip. They took 2 out of 3 in Seattle. They took 2 out of 3 in Houston, which included another gut punch loss, the Jose Altuve home run. So they've been playing better since then. And if you go back to then, I was saying that if they could just find a way to get into the playoffs, I do think they could be dangerous, because you start with the pitching in a short series. And in the American League, if Garrett Cole is at the top of his game and he has the ball in game 1, I still don't see another starting pitcher in the American League who's going to have an advantage over him. So that's a pretty good place to start in game 1 of a series. And now there's a roadmap. And again, all of these things have to go right. And chances are not all of them will have to go right. But Corey Kluber, right before he got injured, had become that bona fide number 2 starter they needed him to be. He pitched the no-hitter. His next game he got injured. He's on his way back. Luis Severino's on his way back. What are you going to get out of him? Can you get 5 innings of 2-run ball, 5 innings of 1-run ball? Jamison Tyone was just the American League Pitcher of the Month for July after it looked like he was a lost cause for the first month and a half of the season. And now all of a sudden lately, what is their biggest weakness pitching-wise? It's been the bullpen. There just aren't enough arms out there. Well, let's just say you got Cole, and you got Kluber, and you got Severino, you got Tyone. Well, Jordan Montgomery, who's pitched well this year, and Domingo Germán are two pretty good arms to stick into the bullpen to add depth. So again, look, that's the best case scenario that I just laid out, but it's out there.
I want to switch over to the Mets here, a team that kind of in the opposite direction of the Yankees right now. I'm going to ask you the difficult question, and you don't have to have a specific answer for me, but what's the reason they're struggling so much right now?
The reason they're struggling so much right now, in my opinion, is that DeGrom is not pitching. And when DeGrom is there, he and their pitching staff masked a lot of deficiencies in the Mets lineup this season. And I don't know what the reason is. It's similar to what the Yankees have dealt with and continue to deal with guys like Gleyber Torres and Gary Sanchez. With the Mets, they have a bunch of guys, whether it's Francisco Lindor, whether it's Michael Conforto, whether it's Jeff McNeil, who have not played up to their expectations this season. And the reason for that, I don't know. The biggest reason why we were all talking about this being an issue with the Yankees and not the Mets for the vast majority of the season is because the Mets had DeGrom and Taijuan Walker, who was an all-star, and Marcus Stroman, who pitched like an all-star in the first half of the season. Well, now DeGrom is out of the equation. Taijuan Walker has certainly come crashing down to earth. And Marcus Stroman, to a certain extent as well, he's never been a guy who's pitched at this level for an entire season. So the Mets were always underachieving offensively, but they were in first place for two reasons. Number one, their pitching staff. And number two, their division. It's not strong. I mean, you've got Philadelphia, you've got Atlanta, decent teams. But again, to make the comparison between the Yankees and the Mets, the Yankees had roughly the same record as the Mets all season. But they've got Boston, Tampa Bay, and Toronto in their division. And right now, the Mets pitching is not carrying their offense like it was the first half of the season.
So the Mets losers of 7 of their last 10. Is it as simple as getting healthy for them, or is there another solution in the interim for them to start playing a little bit better baseball before Jacob deGrom gets back?
It's tough, right? Because now you're starting to see some cracks in the bullpen, which was really good the first half of the season. And that, to me, is still the DeGrom effect. You take DeGrom out, then, everybody's got to do a little bit more. Taijuan Walker and Marcus Stroman, Tyler McGill, who's been good. The starters have to do a little bit more. And then without that ace every 5 days doing what he does, the bullpen has to do a little bit more. That's usually an off day for them or a light day for them. They don't have that built in anymore, and they're not going to until September. So that's been a problem for them as well. The lineup, look, I mean, again, with the Yankees lineup, Gleyber Torres has played better in the second half of the season. Giancarlo Stanton has hit better in the second half of the season. Gary Sanchez has, and those are all guys with track records. All right. The Mets also have guys with track records. Those guys I mentioned, Lindor and Conforto, maybe not the same track records as Giancarlo Stanton or a Gleyber Torres, but they've got track records too. They need those guys to start playing better.
Yeah, I mean, with the Mets here, a lot of the kind of narrative right now is that even if the division lead is slipping away, it's a weak division, and once DeGrom returns in September, it takes a little pressure off that bullpen, kind of like you're saying, and they can still have the division in hand. Do you think that's the case, or are you actually worried that the Mets could seriously lose this division even when they do get DeGrom back in September?
Oh, I don't think DeGrom coming back automatically makes them the favorites to win the division again. I think they're in a dogfight now. And where are they going to be when he comes back? Are they going to be 2 games up? Are they going to be 5 games back? I mean, look, Philadelphia has been, I think, underachieving for the last 2 years since Joe Girardi went down there to take over, but there's still talent on that team. They don't have a lot of pitching depth either. So DeGrom coming back doesn't automatically mean, okay, the Mets are going to, retain their rightful spot on top of the division. But, are we getting Syndergaard back? Can he contribute? Maybe probably out of the bullpen. Carlos Carrasco, let's continue to stretch him out and see if he can slide into that 2-3 spot in the rotation, which is where he was expected to be when the Mets made the trade with Cleveland before the season. So these are all things that can contribute. I think at the end of the day, especially with Acuna out for Atlanta, I think all things being equal, if DeGrom's healthy, the Mets are the best team. But the best team doesn't always win.
Talking with Pat O'Keefe, the sports director and news anchor at News 12, heard on NBA radio and 98.7 ESPN. Want to transition a little bit to basketball just before we let you go here, Pat. Julius Randle signing a 4-year, $117 million extension, seemingly taking a discount to stay in New York. What did you make of that, and what does it mean for the Knicks' future?
I thought it was great because last season there was, this love affair that developed between the Knicks fans and Randle and vice versa, and there was a lot of lip service paid to that. But you never really know. Obviously, everybody said the right things during the season. Randle's play on the court had a lot to do with it. His leadership on and off the court had a lot to do with it. But to actually see him sign this extension when he could have waited another year, and even if he performs 90% of how he played this year, that's a max player in the NBA. That's when DeMar DeRozan at this stage in his career is getting nearly $30 million a year. What Julius Randle did this year is a max level player. And for him to not hold the Knicks' feet to the fire, and that's what you need to do to create, a winning culture and a winning environment. And I know there was a little disappointment the first couple of days of free agency. It was such a special season for the Knicks, and day one of free agency, bringing back Rose and Noel and Burks and then adding Evan Fournier didn't exactly knock anybody's socks off. So I think there was a little bit of disappointment. It felt like the momentum had stalled a little bit. But I also think it's important to remember that unless you sign Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in their primes on the first day of free agency, nobody turns into a contender like that. All right. So I don't think I think there was a little bit increased expectations for the Knicks to turn into a contender, after what they did last season. And that's not going to happen. But what Randle did is allow them the flexibility to continue to grow under this head coach, the coach of the year, continue to develop a guy like RJ Barrett, and then we'll see where we are a year from now. So get better this year, get to the second round of the playoffs this year. All right. And then see where you are right now. But right now, with this contract, two things. Number one, you've kind of got it. You still have an anchor on your roster in Julius Randle, and you don't have a guy whose contract is going to be an albatross for the duration of that.
Well, we mentioned kind of the guys that the Knicks are bringing back. What about Kemba Walker? What about Fournier? Guys that the Knicks went out and got this offseason. What do you think their role is? How are they going to help this Knicks team? And overall, do you see this Knicks team you talked about, instead of maybe moving on to a second round of the playoffs, is that kind of the new goal for this team going into this next season?
I think it has to be a new goal, at minimum, getting to the second round of the playoffs. You want to see linear improvement. And they're better. The Knicks today, in my opinion, are better than they were last season. I mean, Evan Fournier is a big addition. Now that they have Kemba Walker, I wasn't thrilled with the Fournier addition when it seemed like he was the one new addition. But when you can add him to Kemba Walker, I mean, one of the glaring deficiencies for the Knicks in that Atlanta playoff series last year was they just didn't have a guy who could hit or create his own shot. And Fournier can do that. He's done that, to a certain extent with Orlando during his career. He did it to the United States in the Olympics a couple of weeks ago, showing what he's capable of there. And then you have Kemba Walker in the backcourt, and they don't need him to be 31, 32, 33-minute a guy. I think it could be potentially, if his knees can hold up, it could be a great situation between he and Derrick Rose. You start Kemba, you play him 26 minutes a game. You play Derrick Rose 22 minutes a game. Rose goes back to his bench position, which he was so comfortable with. I thought the whole Atlanta series turned around last year when Tom Thibodeau put Rose in the starting lineup. That just took away the Knicks' one great advantage over the Hawks was their bench. And then the other thing is they're both old. They both have a lot of miles on their legs. This will also give them the opportunity to, I know people hate to hear this, but to rest them every now and then. And Tom Thibodeau has never been a guy to do that, but I think he's going to have to take a long, hard look at scheduling off days throughout the season for both Kemba Walker and Derrick Rose.
Pat, I'll get you out of here on this one. You mentioned picking up KD and Kyrie Irving and turning a franchise around. Well, KD is sticking around in Brooklyn, just signed a 4-year, $198 million extension. Does that change anything for you with the Nets? I found like it was going to be pretty expected, but the Nets eventually get that deal done.
You know what's nice about it? I agree. I think it was expected, but what's nice to actually see it, when was the last time we saw Kevin Durant sign a contract extension of that length? It's been a while. He always did the 1+1 thing in Golden State, and there was always that thing hanging over his head all season long. Well, is this going to be your last year? What are you going to do in the offseason? And the nice thing that he did for himself and for his team was kind of put that aside by making this long-term commitment to the Nets. Now you know he's invested. He doesn't have to deal with those questions anymore. We know he hates being asked those questions, but to be honest, that was fair game. He put himself in position to be asked those questions with the way he signed his contracts in the past. Look, right now, August offseason, the favorite to win the NBA championship, in my opinion, is the Brooklyn Nets. And what this has done is add some more long-term stability to that franchise.
Pat O'Keefe, sports director and news anchor at News 12, heard on NBA radio and 98.7 ESPN in New York. Pat, thanks so much for taking some time with us today.
Good talking to you. Thanks a lot, guys.
We'll be back with more one-on-one right after this.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org. This is One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org.
Hello, and welcome back to One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. I'm Colin Lochran here with Sam Davis and Nick DeLuca, and I've got the latest NFL headlines for you, gentlemen. It's August, it's summer, baseball's in full swing, just had NBA free agency, but just beyond the horizon, the leaves will be changing colors. We'll be getting right back on the gridiron with some football. Let's stay local with our first headline here. In New York, the New York Giants had their first days of padded practice. Very exciting. Amidst all this excitement, a brawl broke out, sparked by a late Jabril Peppers hit on running back Corey Clement, and the fight ended up with Daniel Jones at the bottom of the pile. And as punishment, head coach Joe Judge ordered sprints and push-ups for his team. Sam, I'll ask you first, what do you make of this brawl, and how do you feel about Judge's old-school punishment?
I mean, you always see one or two brawls in training camp. It always just seems like that's, I guess, a part of certain teams and how they kind of prepare for the season. I don't mind it just because I think it shows how locked in the Giants are right now and these players are, at least coming up early in training camp. If you're going to, I guess, get into a fight with your own teammates, it shows that you're pretty intense. And to have that intensity that early on in training camp, I really don't mind that. I think that's part of football. Football is a very physical sport. The late hit was uncalled for, and having Daniel Jones at the bottom of a pile is definitely concerning and not something you want from your starting quarterback. But the fact that they're showing some sort of intensity, some sort of fight, for a Giants team that I think the expectations are higher going into the season, and Daniel Jones is at the center of that. He's finally got some receivers to throw to. The excuses are over for him. He's got to step up and be a better quarterback. So I think the Giants are in an exciting situation, and to have a little bit of a fight, a little bit of intensity around training camp is certainly not a bad thing. And Joe Judge handling it the way he did, I'm not surprised with the way he handled in his old-fashioned tactics. There's nothing wrong with running and doing sprints for something that you do wrong. I think there's always a place for that in football and in training camp as well. So overall, I think it shows the intensity that they're bringing this early into training camp, and you can't be. I really don't mind that, to be honest, with this Giants team.
I think Joe Judge handled it the right way and addressing it as something that we might want to taper down on a little bit, because the fights lead to injuries and things of that nature. And I think it is good from an intensity perspective, but also with the knowledge that everyone's got to be pulling in the same direction and making sure that you're coming together as a team. The thing that strikes me, though, is Daniel Jones at the bottom of that pile can't happen. That absolutely 100% cannot occur. And Daniel Jones just needs to be smarter than that. And I don't really know what the situation was in terms of what was said, what happened. How does Daniel Jones get involved in that way? But it plainly cannot happen where Daniel Jones is at the bottom of that pile. This is a huge year for him. This is into year 3. Is he going to take a leap? Because this is what this team is missing right now. It's a quarterback. Their defense was as good as it gets last year. They added the weapons. Saquon's coming back. Kenny Golladay in the fold. You feel pretty good about the rest of the weaponry that they have. The offensive line is improved. It's put up or shut up time for Daniel Jones. And I don't think anyone wants to see the quarterback depth for the Giants behind Daniel Jones. I don't think anyone's interested in trying to figure out what the Giants have behind him. But it strikes me as so irresponsible from Daniel Jones. And there are some people who are going to brush it off as it's just the heat of competition. And, why are you making such a big deal out of this? But it's maturity. Maturity is the quarterback position in the NFL. You need to be a grown-up to be able to play quarterback. And I think Daniel Jones is that guy. But there's just no way that you can find yourself putting yourself in that position with the potential to get hurt in a year that is as big as it is for Daniel Jones this year. I was disappointed to hear that from his perspective. The fight is the fight. Players fight all the time. That happens in camp. And I think Joe Judge has as big a reaction to it because of who is at the bottom of the pile. That's where it's the problem, because Daniel Jones cannot be putting himself in that spot. That's disappointing for me. The rest of it, take it or leave it. That's fine. Camp fights happen. But Daniel Jones has to be better than that, because this is a huge year for him.
Nick, I'm going to echo your sentiment. I mean, Daniel Jones was sacked 45 times last season. That can't happen if they're going to compete in a pretty weak division this year. I mean, you said it yourself. This is a big year for Daniel Jones. I'm going to agree with that. And also, the O-line on this Giants team is not very good. The fact that the guy's already getting knocked down in training camp is not a good sign. The wide receiver core is going to be pretty underrated as the season keeps going. I think they have a great young core. Slayton, Tony, these guys, even Evan Engram, who has his moments that makes Giants fans want to tear their hair out. These guys can play. And if Daniel Jones has a little bit of protection to throw the football to these guys, they're going to be okay. Because the truth is 7-10 can win this division. It should not be a stretch for the Giants to beat out Dallas, to beat out Washington, who might be the favorite, if you could call them that, to win the NFC East. I'm shocked that already he's getting knocked down and that the fight would result in him being injured, or not injured, but at least involved in the first place. What do you guys think of the Giants' prospects this year in the NFC East? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Considering we know this is year 3 for Daniel Jones, considering that the division is as weak as it is there a chance that the Giants can squeak it out? And if so, what is he going to need to do for them to accomplish that?
I think if there was a chance for them to win the division last year, which it might have been a slight chance, but at times there was a thought that the Giants could actually pull out the NFC East and win the division. If they could do it last year, I really think with the improvements that they've made to the wide receiver core and with the steps that Daniel Jones, I think, is expected to take in year 3 here, I think it can be assumed that this Giants team could go out and win the NFC East. I mean, the Cowboys are going to be better. And then, of course, you have Washington as well, who I guess, another strong defensive team. But the Giants have a really solid defense, which fits them well within the NFC East. And it comes down to Daniel Jones. Is he going to be able to take that next step? He's got the receivers. He's got Kenny Galladay. That's going to help a lot. Just guys to throw to. And if he's going to have at least enough protection, it comes down to what Daniel Jones does with this opportunity. But because the Giants had an opportunity to win the division last year, I think there's no reason not to think they have that opportunity again. The NFC East is kind of wide open. I think you have the Giants and then Washington and the Cowboys as well, and then you even have the Eagles there. I think, you could really see a scenario where any of these teams sitting right around 500 wins that division and all of a sudden puts themselves in the playoffs. The Giants can very well be that team, but things need to change on the O-line. Like you talked about, they need to step up, and Daniel Jones needs to step up. That's the big piece. The defense is going to be there. You got to be confident in this defense, but it comes down to Daniel Jones.
Fair to say that it does come down to Daniel Jones. And I'll add one more piece to it. You touched on it a little bit, Sam, but it's the offensive line. It's keeping Daniel Jones upright. It's protecting him. It's creating room for a running game that missed Saquon Barkley sorely last year, and they weren't able to do much in the way of taking the pressure off of Daniel Jones at all. Now, hopefully, Kenny Galladay will be somebody who is able to achieve that. We've mentioned some of the other weapons that exist on this offense and a defense that was among the top in the league last year under Patrick Graham, and with some of the guys that they were able to get. And Leonard Williams really performed very well, and a secondary was very good as well with James Bradbury in the fold there, with Jabril Peppers in the back as well. But it's going to be an uphill battle for them, in my opinion. I think that Dallas is going to come back and be a little bit better than people really expect, with Dak Prescott back from injury and that gruesome injury that he suffered last year, and Zeke Elliott and the weapons that they have on offense. It's about fixing the defense, and I do like what they've done in terms of bringing in some new guys to run it. Dan Quinn, their new defensive coordinator, the former head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, and a guy who had a lot of success in Seattle before landing that job. So I do think they'll be able to turn it around into some semblance of success on the defensive side. In Washington, we'll see, because their defense is as good as it gets in the National Football League, and the offense has weapons, better offensive line in a running game. And now how does it work with Ryan Fitzpatrick at the helm, a guy who as well known around the NFL as anyone in terms of the journeyman quarterback, but he's boom or bust at times, makes some mistakes. He's never really been able to quarterback a team to the playoffs, but this might be the best team that he's ever had at his disposal. So there's just a lot to unpack with the NFC East. But it all comes down to Daniel Jones. That's really what it comes down to. And there's a lot riding on it, because it's not just him. It's Dave Gettleman's job. It's not Joe Judge perhaps yet, but there's a lot riding in the investment that was made in Daniel Jones. And can he improve? There's a lot of talk about, can he take that leap like Josh Allen, who we're going to get to in a minute here. But Josh Allen is a unique jump, and I don't know that that's something that everyone can replicate. Daniel Jones, I think, is going to try. He's got to take care of the football a little bit better. I think has room to grow, can improve on reading defenses as well. But this is a big year for him. I think the Giants can compete. I don't know that I'd pick them to be my favorite to win the division. However, I think that falls more to Washington and to Dallas.
The stakes are definitely high for Jones and the New York Football Giants. I think keeping him upright is going to be very important. And I would venture to say that has to start in training camp. So hopefully there's no more unnecessary brawls there. But Nick, you mentioned Josh Allen. another New York quarterback, we're going to head to our second NFL headline. The Buffalo Bills have signed Allen to a 6-year, $258 million mega contract extension. This comes just 1 year after he tossed 37 touchdowns and led the Bills to an AFC championship bout against the Kansas City Chiefs. Fellas, does this cement the Bills' place as the AFC East's powerhouse for years to come? And more broadly, does it cement them as an NFL powerhouse for years to come?
Nick, I'm going to let you take this as our Bills expert here.
You're going to let me take it?
Yes.
Well, powerhouse, I don't know, because there's still room to grow in building around Josh Allen and seeing how well this team develops. But is he someone who can drive the bus on a powerhouse? Absolutely. There was a few things that I wanted to read off here just in terms of the season that Josh Allen just had. Okay. So set a single season franchise record, passing touchdowns, completions, 300-yard games, passer rating, completion percentage. Remember that when Josh Allen couldn't hit the broadside of a barn? How about passing yards and total touchdowns? Only player in NFL history with 4,000 or more passing yards, 30 or more passing touchdowns, and 8 or more rushing touchdowns in a season. That's how good Josh Allen was this year. Like, I don't know that people understand how good he was, and save for what was a historic season out of Aaron Rodgers, Josh Allen walks away with the MVP. Like, he was better than Lamar Jackson was in 2019 when he won his MVP. So, you know, there's a lot to the improvement and the success that the Bills have had behind Josh Allen, and it's really correlated. But powerhouse, I don't know. I mean, they still are looking up at the Kansas City Chiefs, who are the standard of the AFC right now. So can they really go on a run in winning the AFC East? I think so. I think Miami is a number 2, but they still have to figure out what they're going to get from Tua Tagovailoa and the rest of that team, though improving. New England, you factor and figure will be better when you bring in some of the pieces that they've brought in, but still a quarterback situation that is very much up in the air. Is Mac Jones going to be a guy that you can rely on going forward? Because I don't think Cam Newton is. It's surprising to me that they even brought him back, but he is back in the fold and will be quarterbacking them. And then you've got the Jets, who are the Jets, and what are things going to look like there? But certainly nothing that's going to be coming around this year in terms of market and improvement. So I would have to believe that the Bills are in a driver's seat, in a spot where they can continue to win the AFC East for the next few years and are the best team right now. But a gold standard is still Kansas City, and that's what they're working to overcome and working to beat. But I think Josh Allen has shown that through the first 3 years, he's only going to get better. I think that's going to continue into year 4. And that's what makes this type of player so exciting, because year 1 to year 2, huge jump. Year 2 to year 3, a jump that's never been seen in NFL history before. And he's going to continue to get better. And all accounts in training camp for the Bills are that he looks even sharper than he did last year. So this is a guy who is deservedly getting paid, and getting paid for what he's going to do. That's what Josh Allen talked about in his post-contract signing press conference. The Bills aren't paying me for what I've done. They're paying me for what they think I can do. And the Bills' expectation is that is going to eventually end in a Super Bowl.
I love that you said that, Nick, because, I mean, obviously, like you kind of read off there, Josh Allen had an incredible season, but the fact that he's still thinking about what he can do more for this team and what he can provide, which obviously the goal still is to at least make it to the Super Bowl and get past the Kansas City Chiefs, like you mentioned. So the fact that Josh Allen has that thought process of, sure, last season happened and it was great and I made great strides, but there's more for me to do and there's more out there. That's huge. And I think another thing too is that you mentioned is Josh Allen is, I don't want to say underrated, but people aren't thinking about how good he was and how good of a season he had. Maybe this move and showing that the Bills front office trusts in Josh Allen for the future kind of shows how important he is to this organization, not just last year, not just this coming year, but 6 years, as you mentioned, down the road. So that's something that you got to think about as well. I mean, I think the Bills are in really good hands with a guy like Josh Allen that's going to continue to work hard, continue to get better, make those strides, those improvements, and locking him up long term is really going to help this team challenge the Kansas City Chiefs, a team that a challenge that not a lot of teams are up for. But I really do think this Bills team is up for challenging them, especially with Josh Allen at the quarterback position.
Josh Allen, great season last year, has Stephon Diggs by his side again this year. Should be interesting to see if they can take on Kansas City. But with our last headline, we have a little bit of a rumor flying around. During the past week, we've had conflicting reports on a potential trade that would send Houston Texans quarterback Deshaun Watson to the Philadelphia Eagles. Some are saying that the trade is quite possible, but others, such as NBC Sports, insist that talks are not heating up. Nick, Sam, does this trade happen? And regardless of plausibility, what does it say about Philly's faith in Jalen Hurts and first-year head coach Nick Sirianni that they'd even consider making a move for Watson in the first place?
I think with Watson, I mean, the thing is that with what's going on in court and what's going on with the legal issues that he has, which are plenty, nothing is going to happen, I really don't think, until obviously that is squared away and that's figured out. So that's priority number one. You don't want a guy coming in into your club, into your locker room from the Houston Texans to the Eagles that has all of that looming over his head and is dealing with something of that nature. So certainly that's what's going to happen first. That's what's going to figure out whether Deshaun Watson has a future playing football for the Texans, or honestly has a future playing football, period. So we'll see what happens with what goes on with the assault allegations, of course. But in terms of from the Eagles' perspective, I think it says a lot about how they feel about Jalen Hurts. It says a lot how they feel about a rookie head coach in going out and sure, getting a guy like Deshaun Watson, and we know what he can provide on the field, is certainly would help this Eagles team a lot. But when you hear rumors flying around like this, if you're Jalen Hurts in this situation and you hear something like this, I mean, it's got to take a little bit of a shot to your confidence. I know Deshaun Watson is a different quarterback and a different player, but you are obviously kind of not seen as the guy that's going to get the ball and start for the Philadelphia Eagles. And maybe he'll take that as motivation to work harder and prove that he is the guy. But I don't know, it could also work as kind of a shot of lack of confidence for the Eagles looking in other directions to a guy like Deshaun Watson to fill the quarterback need, apparently, that they have.
Yeah, it's the legal battle complicates all of this stuff. And that, I think, is the most important part of at least the preliminary discussion about where all of this sits. And it's hard to just push it aside, but from a trade perspective, that's what NFL teams are going to do. So am I surprised that the Eagles are kicking the tires on a guy who, again, save for the legal battles, is a top 5 to 10 quarterback in the NFL? No. And I don't know that that's necessarily disrespectful or is 100% a reflection of how they feel about Jalen Hurts, and more about if Deshaun Watson's available and we've got the requisite ammo to go and trade for a guy of that caliber with the legal issues taken care of, then we're going to do that. Now, that, of course, again, it's complicated to talk about it in that way, but I don't think that there is, Deshaun Watson's just as good of a quarterback talent-wise as there is in the National Football League. Like, he's really that good. And so would the Eagles consider trading for him? Yes. I mean, I think there are a lot of teams that have quarterbacks that would consider that. I think the Giants would be wise to, again, for a quarterback of that caliber, kick the tires on it, because Daniel Jones isn't that good right now. Now, again, there's so much that complicates it, in addition to just front offices admitting, say, I was wrong about Daniel Jones, or I was wrong about this quarterback that I drafted, but Deshaun Watson is that talented. So, no, I'm not surprised necessarily. I think their whole offseason has been really just very odd. They fired Doug Peterson because he had a non-existent relationship with Carson Wentz. So then you trade Wentz anyway. You bring in Sirianni because he's a guy who worked with Frank Reich, which seemed to signal that you wanted to bring in somebody to fix Carson Wentz, and then that's not the case. So he's out. And then Jalen Hurts is your guy that remains as somebody who you were replacing in week 17 with the whole, like, there's so much that just doesn't make a ton of sense with what the Eagles are doing right now. And in addition to putting confidence in Jalen Hurts, they trade back to try and get another first-round pick for next year in the draft this year, which signals we want ammo to potentially go up and grab a quarterback in next year's draft. So there is a lot going on with the Eagles. That is why I think that the rumors make a little bit more sense, just because clearly trading for a player of the caliber of Deshaun Watson, the Texans are going to want a large sum in just compensation. So multiple first-round picks make sense. That's why Miami is often thrown around as well. So we'll see. But I'm not. It makes sense to me why the Eagles would want to try and kick the tires on it. I just don't know that it's something that ends up happening just because of everything else that is going on with Deshaun Watson and the legal battle and how that plays out and what the Texans want to do. But it sounds like Houston's at least willing to trade him. Now it's on the other teams to say, where is this thing in terms of the process of the legal stuff and where does it fall from there? But I'm not surprised to see that the Eagles wanted to perhaps make a move for a guy like Deshaun Watson. I think that they had signaled that with Jalen Hurts beforehand, trading back to get an extra first-round pick.
Yeah, I think from a pure talent perspective, it makes sense to want a guy like Deshaun Watson. But when you take into account the legal battle that's going on, it makes zero sense. And I'd argue even from a pure football perspective, it makes absolutely no sense either. Because to get Watson in the first place, some are saying Houston would want someone on the O-line, someone that could protect a future quarterback in the event that they're that bad that they get a high draft pick to build around, right? Philly's O-line is not that good to begin with. So you're essentially putting Watson in a bad situation from the get-go because you'd have to give up probably an anchor piece that you might have already. And then on top of that, the weapons that Watson would have in Philly would not be top-notch at all. I mean, Arcega-Whiteside has not shown that he's a guy capable of being a number one receiver. And Travis Fulgham, from everything I've seen, is the same way. Good talent. They can be maybe a 2 or 3, maybe a guy in the slot that can get you, 5 catches on a good game. But I don't see them being guys that are necessarily big vertical threats downfield, or someone like a Tyreek Hill that can get you 10 receptions and 2 touchdowns a game. I just think it makes absolutely no sense any way you slice it, other than just for the pure, we want a talented guy behind center. And if I'm Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni, I'm scratching my head at the idea that they're even thinking about this, because Hurts kind of played well last year. I mean, he wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but he at least added some excitement to a team that really needed it after just injuries have cost them a lot of playoff success and a lot of regular season success. And Hurts added something to that club last year, in my opinion. And if you're Sirianni, that's definitely not how you'd want to start with someone that had basically a media circus around him getting traded in your first year. So I don't think that would work for anyone involved, quite frankly.
Potentially, but you still have to make the move for the quarterback. I will say that. And again, this is all conditional with everything that has gone on with Deshaun Watson. But even if there's not a lot to build around him at the moment, getting the quarterback and then having to build from there is a better place to start than, we don't have a quarterback, but we've got perhaps an O-line piece to protect the quarterback that we don't have. That, to me, at least makes a little bit more sense. But again, fair points on the rest of the way about bringing everything else in. For me, I think that's a fair concern. And again, how close to a deal is this thing? I don't think very. I think there was a jump of the gun in trying to report something that evidently has not gained any traction and been refuted by a number of outlets. So it doesn't seem like this thing is close, nor should it be, because the Eagles, in my opinion, would be foolish to make any move at this point in time, because they don't know whether they're actually going to get Deshaun Watson, because they don't know how this thing is going to play out. And undoubtedly, because of that, the Texans would be selling low as well. So I don't think that any of this, as Sam mentioned, would come to a resolution before there is at least some understanding of how this might shake out. We're going to have to go to break again. So, final hour, we close out the show with the landscape of the Major League Baseball playoff push. And when we come back, we react to the latest from Tokyo. USA Basketball, a gold medal. USA Baseball, a silver, and general impression. Stay with us. We'll be right back here on One on One.
One on One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Final hour of One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Nick DeLuca, joined by Sam Davis, Alex Walls, our producer Colin Lochran with the headlines. We're going to get into some of the latest from Tokyo and the Olympics. USA Basketball bringing home gold with an 87-82 victory over France, and USA Baseball falling to Japan this morning, 2-0 loss to earn the silver medal. Nick Martinez, the Fordham alum, 6 innings, allowing just 1 earned, but not enough, as the United States couldn't generate much of anything offensively. Let's start with the good news. USA Basketball, it was a tough one, 87-82. France hung in there for most of the game, but Kevin Durant proving to be too much for France to handle.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is probably the first year, or at least I can remember in recent history, where there's been actually concern over the United States, or at least doubt over whether or not they were the favorite for winning the gold medal. I think they were always seen as the best and the most talented team in terms of basketball at the Olympics. But with a couple losses in the exhibition games and then the loss to France to start off the Olympics, there was certainly concern over whether the United States would figure things out. And I think they really did play their best game against France in the gold medal game there. I mean, they really put it all together. France, you got to give them a ton of credit for just sticking around and hanging around. I mean, Rudy Gobert, and they've got some really quality players there. Fournier as well, future Nick. I think that you got to give them a ton of credit, first of all, for just sticking around, because even going to like the fourth quarter of this game, when the USA lost to France, it was the fourth quarter where they kind of ceded. They had the lead and then blew it, and France was able to come back and win that game. You were a little worried about that going to the fourth quarter just because France was able to stick around. But that's where the USA, I think, really proved that they were the better team. And it started with Kevin Durant, of course, 29 points. He's, I think, the highest scorer in Olympic history now, which is incredible for the United States. And then also what's important to note as well is the guys around him. I hate to say supporting cast just because they're all stars and they're all incredible players, but Damian Lillard, a guy that stepped up nicely. Jason Tatum, another guy that had a good game. Draymond Green also had some clutch plays offensively and defensively. So, I mean, I really think that it was a total team effort, and it was really the best basketball USA has played all Olympics so far, and it came at the right time, of course, the gold medal game.
It's interesting when you look at this roster that was regarded as perhaps not as high quality as what the United States has run out there in the past. I mean, no LeBron James or Steph Curry as some of the top guys in the NBA, of course, Anthony Davis as well. I mean, the list goes on about some of the guys that were not going to come and play and then those who did. But you still are struck by Jason Tatum, Chris Middleton, Draymond Green coming off the bench. I mean, that is still an incredible accumulation of talent. And Kevin Durant proving why he is the top of the top in the NBA, 29 points, 9 of 18 from the field. And he took over that game because without Kevin Durant, the United States does not beat France. And that's how good that he has continued to be, was outstanding in the playoffs with Brooklyn, despite the loss to Milwaukee. I mean, he carried them without Kyrie Irving and James Harden, and he did it again for the United States. And a sigh of relief, I think, more than anything for the U.S., because they are always in a weird spot. I think the best example or the best comparison to the United States basketball in the Olympics is probably a team like Alabama football, where there's just this routine expectation that they win every year and that they should be better than everybody else because they have the best players. But it's not that simple. I mean, there are other teams, and France is really impressive, and Spain and some of the other countries, even Slovenia with Luka Doncic. I mean, you have Luka Doncic on your team. You have an opportunity to win. That's how good that Luka is. So the international basketball scene has just improved dramatically over the last 15 to 20 years, where there is competition. There is real competition for the United States trying to take home a gold medal. And it took an excellent performance from one of the, if not the best player on the planet, Kevin Durant, and Damian Lillard getting in there as well. Devin Booker playing some good basketball. That's what it took for them to be able to overcome France. And that is interesting to me, just the closeness of the gold medal game and how tight a contest it was. And the United States overcoming a couple of early losses before coming to the Olympics, but they were able to piece it together enough. Greg Popovich able to lead them to a gold medal in his first go round as the head coach of USA basketball. Of course, Coach K was in there the few years prior. So able to get that victory and good feelings for the United States and USA basketball after a rough start to the tournament.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point. Just the way that international basketball has changed recently has been really refreshing, because as much as here in America, we love to root for the United States to win the gold medal just about every Olympics, it is nice and a little bit more exciting to see some other teams come up and play really good basketball, like France. I mean, they really impressed me, even in the gold medal game, which they were unfortunate losers in. I mean, Rudy Gobert and Dante Exum and of course Fournier as well, and then even some of the players that we don't really know too much about outside of the NBA really stepped up for France and played a very good game. Kept it close with the United States. I think they really did everything they could in this game to keep it close, hoping that maybe the United States would get cold from shooting, or maybe KD would start to miss shots down the stretch, although he did not. And that was one of the big differences, is that the United States hit their three-pointers and hit their shots, which they did not do in the first time around against France. The fact that France is right there and keeping it kind of within 5 to 10 points for the entire game, I think shows just how far these teams have come, how the NBA has expanded globally, which is awesome for the sport. It just makes it a more popular sport, and it makes people more interested in it when you have people from all over the world and not just all over the United States. So that's a huge thing as well. And it's going to continue to get better. So down the road, you're going to see for United States Olympic basketball, it's not going to be too easy anymore. There's going to be guys like Luka Doncic leading teams, and when he's on a team, like you mentioned, they can win a gold medal. So the fact that down the road, those trends I think are going to continue. It's not going to be easy for Team USA, but overall in this one, I was really impressed, and definitely a sigh of relief for them to get back on track and find a way to win the gold despite some early concerns.
Yeah, interesting just for them to have to overcome what they had to overcome. It's just one of those situations where it's almost a no-win situation, not that you don't enjoy the gold medal, but if you win, you were supposed to win. If you don't, then it's really a failure, and especially coming overseas without perhaps the top of the top with what the United States basketball scene has to offer, but they're able to get it done against a tough France team that put up a very good fight. Want to flip over to the baseball scene here, and the United States falling to Japan in what was a good run, just not able to get anything offensively. They're shut out, and a team that goes 4-2, Japan, perfect 5-0 throughout the tournament. Couple of close matchups between these two sides in the tournament. Japan coming from behind to win in the round robin stage. The United States making their way through to advance in the semifinal and then getting the gold medal game, but settling for silver. I was really just, I found it nice to be able to watch baseball in the Olympics again. I'm a huge fan of it, and I think it's something that should stay. It is a more international sport that, you know, is growing every day as well. We just talked about basketball, and I think baseball in the same vein is so much fun to be able to see some of those guys compete. Now, you know, unfortunately, with the way that the Olympics fall, it's tough to get the involvement from some of the stars of stars in the major leagues. That's more the World Baseball Classic, but I still think it's a fun addition to the Olympics and to have the tournament, because I think that the Olympic gold might mean a little bit more to some people than even the World Baseball Classic championship. And it was nice to see the Olympics return to baseball. And although it doesn't work out for the United States in a gold medal game against Japan, who defends home turf, it was just nice to see that back into the Olympics.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I mean, obviously we would love to see kind of like what the World Baseball Classic does, where Major League Baseball players from all the different countries, because the MLB is represented very well as a global sport. You know, there are plenty of people outside of the United States that play Major League Baseball at an extremely high level. So that would be awesome to see that kind of representation. Unfortunately, with the time frame of the Olympics, that's not possible. But there is a positive to that, and it gives the opportunity for veterans who maybe aren't playing in Major League Baseball anymore and aren't really at that level anymore, or also minor leaguers or young players coming up through farm systems where they have the opportunity to travel to Tokyo, play in high leverage, really important games on national television, and go out and maybe win a gold medal. That would mean a ton to those guys. That would mean so much to them, maybe more than it would mean to a professional player who, of course, their end goal would be winning the World Series. So the fact that these guys get that opportunity on the biggest stage is huge. And unfortunately for the United States, I mean, I'm really happy that we also had a Fordham alum pitching and pitched really well in that game as well. Nick Martinez, like you said, really pitched great for the United States, gave them a great chance to win that game. But Japan is a really solid team. I mean, there are certainly players over there that maybe the players, at least on the Olympic team, aren't in Major League Baseball yet, but there are plenty of guys there that can get there, and we've seen success from Japanese athletes in Major League Baseball. So they're a really solid team, and nothing to take away from them, because they definitely earned the gold medal. But the United States, I think, put up a really good fight for a team that's filled with veterans like Todd Frazier, for example, or younger prospects still working their way up and figuring things out at a professional level, to be able to head to the gold medal game and compete with Japan in both games. I mean, they lost, like you said, in the round robin by just one, and then they lost 2-0 in the gold medal game. To compete with Japan and compete, and those are the only that's the only team they lost to. The fact that they were able to play at such a high level in the Olympics is really, I think, just refreshing for USA baseball. And I agree with you. I love having baseball in the Olympics. It's a sport that needs to be there. When you think of summer sports, I mean, baseball is a summer sport. So it needs to be there. And I'm really glad that it is, even if it's not Major League Baseball players in it, it's still players that deserve that gold medal or the opportunity to earn one for sure.
It's so interesting to look at the USA baseball roster too. Like I'm a huge fan of that, to see Tyler Austin, a former Yankee, Todd Frazier.
Remember names that you forgot about.
Yeah, exactly. David Robertson pitching, and Nick Martinez getting the start, guy who was with Texas. And it's just, all of the guys that are up there. And then also to see some of the younger guys with the opportunity, and just Edwin Jackson is pitching for United States Baseball, which is just amazing. I mean, this guy continues to pitch. He was on 14 major league teams and then adds another uniform with USA Baseball. So it's just, it's so much fun to see some of those names, and then also get the exposure to some of the guys you might not see otherwise. I don't watch Japanese baseball, terribly often. It's not something that I do because I'm very much paying attention to the major leagues, but to see some of the talent that exists in Japan and in the rest of the world too is pretty cool, with some of the guys who are really having success in places like the KBO or Japanese leagues, like Masahiro Tanaka and a guy who comes over, but if they don't come over, you don't see them. So to see, and the differences in the way that they play baseball too. I mean, Japan is a very much focused on the fundamentals of the game. It's not the way that baseball has evolved here. It's not the launch angle and the strikeout rate and the three true outcomes type of baseball. There is more of the fundamental aspect of, yes, they do hit for power, but they will bunt and execute some of those things. And I do think it's just interesting stylistically to see baseball played in another part of the world, that I think is also awesome to get that on the basketball side as well. Just, hey, there's a lot of iso ball in American basketball. What does that look like in the international, rest of the world, in the way that they play basketball? And I never forgot Luka Doncic coming into the NBA saying, they don't play the way that they play in the international circuit as they do in the NBA. And it's true. They certainly play a lot differently. So it's always unique to be able to see those differences. And it's great. And I'm with you. Definitely want to see baseball continue to be part of the fold for the Summer Olympics going forward. And congratulations to USA Baseball at reaching the silver medal. Tough loss against Japan. And, of course, the United States basketball team holding serve with the expectation of winning the gold medal. They're able to get that done. Final break before we head out of here on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. We'll wrap it up talking Major League Baseball playoff picture. The Giants leading the NL West. Where does that leave the Dodgers and the Padres, the big winners at the Major League Baseball trading deadline? The AL East, where do things stand there? The Yankees playing better baseball, the Rays up top, the Red Sox struggling. Where will that shake out in the future playoff matchups? We'll discuss that next as we close out the show here on One-on-One.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Final segment of One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Nick DeLuca, alongside Sam Davis, Alex Wolves, our producer, Colin Lochran, joining us with the headlines. And again, here in this final segment, as we wrap up the show, talking some Major League Baseball playoff picture, and wanted to start with a lot of our show focused on the American League East and the Yankees and the Mets and where things shake out east. Little battle going on in the National League West. The Giants, who have surprised everybody with how well they've played, 69-41 this year, a 4-game lead over the Dodgers in the National League West, 65-45, and then the Padres 7.5 back in third in the division, in a team that had real World Series expectations, aspirations, and still do. I mean, these teams are it's incredible what the National League West has done this year. And as well as the Giants have played, it's just a question mark about, can they ultimately sustain this level of play? You keep waiting for them to come crashing down to earth, and they never do. I mean, this is a team that was just not expected to be, certainly of this caliber, perhaps challenge for a wild card, but they are playing better than the World Series favorite Dodgers or even the Padres.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you bring up, because the whole year with the Giants, we've always thought that eventually, things are going to return to reality. The Dodgers, and then you add into the context the Scherzer and Turner trade for the Dodgers, and you think, okay, now it is the time. The Giants have been a great story, but now is the time when the Dodgers really start to turn things around. At least, I mean, I hate to say turn things around because they've had a great season as well, but I guess overtake the Giants in the division, and things, I guess, return to normal. And the Giants slide into either that, maybe that first wild card spot, but that just hasn't happened. I mean, you mentioned a 4-game lead. That's a pretty decent lead against a really good Dodgers team that sure has had some injuries this year, but overall, you got to think they're the World Series favorites in the Dodgers. The fact that the Giants continue to play this well, the Chris Bryant addition was huge for them. That helped them out a ton, I think. And the guys that they're doing it with is just really interesting to me. Brandon Crawford, Brandon Belt, I mean, guys that have been a part of the and Buster Posey as well, guys that have been a part of 2014 Giants World Series championships. And it is now 2021, and these guys are still performing at a high level and helping out this Giants team. That's really impressive to me. And I think it's a shame. The one thing I will say is that I think the NL West this year is proving how it's almost unfair to have a 1-game wild card decide your season, when the Dodgers and Padres and Giants, 2 of those 3 teams, are going to have to battle it out in 1 game, and one of those teams is going to go home after having an unbelievable season, where in another division they would be leading by far. I mean, look at the NL East compared to that. Any of those 3 teams would be leading that division easily. So that's one little flaw, I think, pointing out with the playoffs this year. But I can't help but just, I guess, be confident in the Giants. I think if it's not a fluke. I mean, they're obviously a really solid team. And who's to say they can't keep it up and really go out and win this division, which if they do, if they find a way to get past whoever they match up with come playoff time in the NL West, whether that be the Dodgers or the Padres, if they get past a team like that, which would be an excellent playoff series, I mean, you got to look at this Giants team as a favorite over the rest of the field, because the NL West seems to be far and above the best division in baseball right now. So you got to be, I guess, give the Giants a ton of credit for everything that they've done and be a little bit confident in them and start to see that maybe this is, in fact, their division and their year.
Heading into the season, nobody saw this coming. You guys are completely right. But all the talk in the NL West was centered around the defending champion Dodgers and the Padres. They acquired Blake Snell, obviously, and rightfully so. I mean, with those moves and with that level of talent on both the Padres and Dodgers, that should have been where the onus was placed and where the media attention lies. But what the Giants are doing is just incredible. And I'm a big numbers person. So when I see that you're first in home runs, you're third in OPS, Brandon Crawford, a guy you mentioned, Sam, is going to at least tie or break his career high in home runs this season after having seasons where he's, not a home run hitter at all. when Buster Posey's hitting 325 after being in, out, and back around again with injuries, it's hard not to have faith in this team. I mean, look at Alex Wood. He's 9-3. Johnny Cueto's found the fountain of youth. He has a 3.83 ERA. It's remarkable, because if you were to tell me in April that the San Francisco Giants would win the West, I wouldn't have believed it. I would have laughed. Kevin Gossman, before he got injured, he's 10-5 with a below 3 ERA. That's insane to me. And, the Dodgers are only 3.5 back, but look at the schedule. You're playing Arizona and Colorado down the road. That's San Francisco's path. Those are lowly teams that they should be able to handle quite easily. And I know the Mets have been horrible, but the Dodgers do have to play them coming up, as do the Padres. And you never know. The potential exists for the Mets to steal a game or two. So the Giants are in a very good situation right now. And I, for one, didn't see it coming at all. And I think it's great for the sport. I think it's great that a team from the Bay Area is doing great. Really good stuff all around for the Giants.
I don't think anyone could have seen it coming. Just when you look at where guys are performing right now compared to where they have in the past, and also with the knowledge of some of the age that they have on their team, because I don't know how you would have said, yeah, Buster Posey's going to go out and have a year like he's having, or that they were going to get that production from Brandon Crawford or along the lines of Kevin Gossman and Johnny Cueto, and the list goes on and on. But I just don't know that you could have even foreseen that, just because it doesn't happen in Major League Baseball, especially this year, when this is not a lineup that is overly powerful. And we'll get to the addition of Chris Bryant in a second, but this is an environment in Major League Baseball where there are fewer home runs being hit. There's discussion about all the strikeouts and moving the mound back because we're not finding the success with the hitters. This is not 2019 where some guy, because of something with the baseballs, went out and had a 1-year wonder 30 home run season. This is in as difficult an environment as there has been in the last couple of years to find success hitting the baseball. And the Giants have surprised everyone and shown off the power, which is really interesting to see. But I don't know whether they are going to be able to sustain this. And that's really the next question for them, because as good of a season as they've had, you just look at the roster that the Dodgers have and some of the health issues that they have had to work through, and the Padres as well, and some of the injury issues that they have had. Are they going to be able to make up some ground? But at the same time, I'm with you. There's not a lot of reason to doubt what the Giants have done to this point, because you're so far into the season. It's been so impressive, and it's 110 games at this point, and they just continue to roll. So I don't know that you can say that this is a fluke, or they just seem to be that good. And really a lot of credit as well going to Gabe Kapler, who a number of people were down on coming out of Philadelphia, and the way things ended right there. And to see him turn around and lead a team like this just out of nowhere, a lot of credit goes to him and to the Giants organization. They're just they seem to be an organization that really gets it and understands it. And, that doesn't always equate to success, because some years you're going to have more at your disposal than others. But this is an organization that routinely is able to compete.
Well, the thing with baseball, we talked about it with the New York Yankees lately with how they've been playing. Sometimes it's hard to explain. And I mean, the Yankees, you can go and look at Joey Gallo and Anthony Rizzo, but it's also like what we talked about, kind of just a vote of confidence for the team as a whole. And with the Giants, I think of something similar, especially, I mean, you add a guy like Chris Bryant, that gives them even more confidence. But just in general this year, sure, if you look on paper, the Dodgers are a much better team. Even the Padres, I think, on paper are a better team. But you can't really explain what's going on with the San Francisco Giants. Other than that, I guess you just have to think it's going to keep happening. As long as they believe in that clubhouse, which I think they have shown that they have, that they are the best in the NL West, or that they are the team that can win the World Series, which of course, I think by now, Gabe Kapler and this entire clubhouse has bought into that idea. They don't, it matters, of course, the guys that they bring out there, but if you look at it just on paper, that's you gotta think about it within the environment of baseball and just how the sport works, where it is so much about momentum, it is so much about chemistry, and so much about having fun, something that we talked about with the New York Yankees as well lately. So I think this Giants team just has it all going for them. And sometimes there are seasons like this for teams where you can't quite explain how it works, how they're winning, and what's going on, but it continues to happen, which is why I think I'm starting to get pretty confident that maybe this is in fact going to be their division, just because of it just seems like almost destiny for them this season.
They've been rolling along, and the addition of Chris Bryant is a major benefit come postseason time, in my estimation, because the game changes. It's been proven time and time again that you can hit home runs and get walks all the way until the postseason. But once October comes, it becomes so much about situational hitting, situational base running, and being the smarter team. And you got to think having Chris Bryant in your lineup, even if it's just in a pure fear factor mode where the opposing pitcher's out there, he doesn't want to pitch to Chris Bryant. He's going to have to pitch around him at some point, which opens up possibilities for other guys like Brandon Crawford, like Buster Posey, who have postseason experience and who are having great years on top of that. If you're the Giants right now, you've got to be thrilled with how this is going. And the possibility exists that you'll have home field advantage during the playoffs against a team like the Dodgers or the Padres down the road. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, it will. And the last dynamic here for the Giants is that addition of Chris Bryant. So where does he fit into the fold? And I think he adds a ton. They needed another big bat in that lineup with the knowledge that Brandon Crawford was likely overachieving this year, certainly in power production, or a guy like Buster Posey has had a really great bounce back year and been able to carry them some of the way offensively. But now can they supplement that with a guy like Chris Bryant, who is having another outstanding season, save for a 2020 where he was down just a bit, and that's a 60-game season. Chris Bryant has just done an outstanding job in being that middle of the order thumper in the lineup. I mean, it's just been incredible, the consistency with which he has operated in the middle of the Cubs lineup, hitting for power, also hitting for pretty good average relatively for a third baseman power hitter as well. So he has really added a lot, and the position flexibility is huge for him. He can play third, he can play first, he can play corner outfield. So he gives them so much of an ability to work around and as a major factor in the middle of their order. I really like what Chris Bryant brings to the table, and in particular to a Giants team that is really going to benefit from him being in the fold.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Bryant, I just to echo that, the versatility is huge with him, the ability, and that's why he was such a high value as a trade piece, because of his ability not just to play third, but to also play the outfield. And I think, Colin, you brought up a good point too, is that, pitchers take notice of Chris Bryant in a lineup, and they might have to work or pitch around him, which leads to other guys that have been hot for this Giants lineup to really step up in the postseason. And having experience, Chris Bryant also brings that playoff experience. You've seen what he did with the Chicago Cubs, of course, helping them get their big World Series. So that helps as well. And I think this Giants team, you got to look at them as a favorite out there in the NL West and going into the playoffs.
He is one of the best acquisitions made at this deadline, in my opinion. And I think really you're only going to see the full benefits of that come playoff time and down the stretch here in September. Because I'm telling you, as soon as the weather gets cold or colder in California, the game changes. And I think he's just a guy that can really spark an offense, or at the very, very least, and this is even a huge benefit in my estimation, get other guys the opportunities to have big moments. And San Francisco's been accustomed to that. It might not be an even year, but it still could be their year.
That's a good point. It's not an even year.
That's true, yeah. I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Which is always a good sign for San Francisco in terms of even years. But you never know. Maybe it's just they haven't won one in a little while. So maybe now they're going to start a run of odd years. I'm not sure which one on that one. That's a very good point. Want to wrap up here with just working through some of the American League East. We touched on it a little bit earlier in the show, but the Yankees playing much better baseball. When you look at where the Rays are sitting at 66-44 atop the division, Boston 2.5 games back at 64-47. The Yankees to 11 games over 500 after the victory last night, 5.5 back. Toronto right behind at 6.5 back. I'm just curious whether the division for you guys is out of reach for the Yankees. Where does that leave the Red Sox in this fold? And I as I sit here and look at the standings, I don't know how sustainable this play is for the Yankees. This 8 out of 10, 7-1 after acquiring Gallo and Rizzo. But you have to feel like it can't hurt. And I don't know that the Yankees, I'll say it this way, the Yankees still have a chance to win the division.
I don't, it's tough for me to say it's out of reach, but the reason I'm a little pessimistic with the Yankees, especially, I mean, they have been playing so well lately, so this is tough to say, but for me, it's not one team, it's two teams in that division that they really need to leapfrog. It's not just the Boston Red Sox at the top of the division, not playing as well lately. A team that the Yankees, we talked about it earlier, that I hate to say this, but a team the Yankees could potentially overcome and take over in making the playoffs. But the Rays are a team that always gives the New York Yankees trouble. They win a lot of regular season games. They find a way to do it with guys that you wouldn't expect. I mean, their average as a team is terrible. They don't have amazing, incredible, eye-popping numbers that stand out as a team, but they win baseball games. They really do find a way to win. And that's something that I think I would be shocked if they were to go on a big losing streak and fall down in the division. And you mentioned, Nick, as well, with the Yankees, is it sustainable for them to play this well? They can play well, and for them, it's just about being consistent and winning series after series. That's important, and that's what they've been doing since Joey Gallo and Anthony Rizzo, of course. Are they going to play 7-1 or however many wins that is in a 10-game or 20-game stretch? I don't know. That seems like a lot, especially with, I mean, you still have some concerns with the lineup and the fact that they haven't really shown to be incredible. They haven't really shown to be better or what we've expected still. So for me, that's why I guess the fact that it's two teams in the division, especially being the Rays at the top, and the fact that, sure, the Yankees have been playing better lately, but they're going to have to continue with the hole that they dug themselves in. They're really going to have to play pretty, not perfect baseball, but pretty dominant baseball for the next month or two, which they can do. Don't get me wrong. I do believe that it is possible. And the wild card is definitely within reach, especially if the Red Sox continue struggling. But the division, I really don't think they can overcome the deficit and the baseball that they have played leading up to the trade deadline.
The wild card is definitely doable. If you're the Yankees, you have to be feeling good about that right now, especially with the way the Red Sox have been spiraling. Excuse me. They were outscored 57-22 in their last 8 games. That is horrendous. Last night, Evaldi got absolutely lit up by Toronto, gave up 7 runs in 4 2/3 innings. If you're Boston, you can't have that happen if you want to make the postseason. I mean, beginning of the year, I would have described this Red Sox team just as the 2013 team, where guys were overachieving. Remember, on that team, you had guys like Johnny Gomes, Mike Napoli, who were kind of the island of misfit toys coming to life and having these incredible seasons. Same thing happened this year. I mean, Alex Verdugo, Hunter Renfroe, Kike Hernandez, just kind of odds and ends players that stepped up. Now, this team's looking a lot like the 1978 Red Sox. And yeah, they might have had some good players, Jim Rice, Kari Yastrzemski, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because you blew your division lead. You missed out on the postseason. So if you're the Yankees, you're licking your chops right now because Boston is spiraling out of control. And the only thing that could save them is if Chris Sale comes back, helps that rotation, becomes an anchor, and is the guy that they know he can be. But That's a lot to ask for a guy coming straight out of injury.
I like a 1978 Red Sox reference on the show just before we get out of here. I want to make sure that's known. Quickly, I'm going to give you a one-word answer. Who wins the American League East? Go.
Rays, for sure.
Rays.
Nick?
I was going to go Rays. I don't want to have all of us agree here. I think
take the Yankees. Do it on the record. Take the Yankees. I know you want to.
The division is within reach for the Yankees. It's going to be close. I don't think they're out of it, but it is a tall task, and I don't know that they 100% get back there. Do I think they can host a wild card game? Absolutely. So we'll stay tuned for that. But a clean sweep. It's going to be the Rays winning the American League East, says our panel here. And that is just about going to do it for us here on One on One. If you missed any of today's segments, today's show available on demand on WFUV Sports' YouTube channel. The sports director of WFUV is Bobby Chaffardini. The producer of today's show has been Alex Wolves for Sam Davis and Colin Lachlan with the headlines. I'm Nick DeLuca. Thanks for hanging out with us. One on One, a production of WFUV Sports.